Welcome back to another story on Muse Fanfiction. This time, we're bringing you, What If Makima Found Harry in the Cupboard and Trained the Ultimate Control Wizard for Public Safety. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Cupboard. The rain had been falling since noon, which suited Makima perfectly. She walked down Privet Drive at a pace that nobody would remember. Not fast, not slow, the kind of stride that made eyes slide off her the moment they tried to focus. Her coat was pale, her hair pinned up against the wet, and the clipboard she carried had nothing written on it. It was a prop. She'd learned decades ago that humans trusted clipboards the way they trusted uniforms, without thinking, which was exactly how she preferred them. The energy signature had been logged 3 days ago by the European Division's passive sensors. An anomalous concentration of unbound magical force, the report said. Unusual density for a residential area. Possibly a ley line convergence. Possibly a dormant artifact. Possibly nothing. Makima had read the report, set down her coffee, and taken the next train to Surrey. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. That was the interesting part. Number 4, Privet Drive was a house that tried very hard to be ordinary. The garden was clipped with the aggression of someone who needed their neighbors to know they cared. The car in the drive was freshly washed despite the weather. The curtains were exactly the same as the curtains next door, which were exactly the same as the curtains 3 doors down. Makima stood on the pavement across the street for a moment and looked at the house with the quiet, patient attention she gave to everything, and she felt the energy immediately. It wasn't in the walls. It wasn't in the ground. It was inside. She crossed the street. The man who answered the door was large in the way that suggested he'd been athletic once and had let it go aggressively. He had almost no neck. His mustache sat on his upper lip like something that had landed there and was waiting to be asked to leave. He looked at Makima the way men like him always looked at women who knocked on their door unannounced, with immediate suspicion trying to hide behind bluster. "Yes," he said. "Whatever you're selling, we don't want any." "Good afternoon," Makima said. She smiled. "My name is Mara Keller. I'm with the Surrey Child Welfare Assessment Division." She held up the clipboard. "We've had an administrative flag on this address regarding a minor in residence. I'm here to conduct a brief home visit. It shouldn't take long." The man, Vernon Desley, she'd checked the address against the registry before coming, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Behind him, from deeper in the house, came the sound of a television and the smell of something being boiled past the point of nutrition. "We haven't done anything wrong," Vernon said. Makima's smile didn't change. "Of course not. This is routine." She had been told, early in her career, that she had a particular quality in her voice, something that made people want to agree with her even when they knew they shouldn't. She'd found it useful. Vernon stepped back. He didn't seem to mean to. He just did. She walked in. The house was clean in the way that suggested someone spent a lot of energy on appearances. Everything matched. Everything was in its place. There were photographs on the wall in the hallway, a large, blonde woman, Vernon, and a boy with a red, piggy face who featured in every single one of them. The boy was photographed at birthday parties, at the seaside, in front of a Christmas tree, grinning with the specific expression of a child who had never been told no. There was no photograph of anyone else. The large woman came out of the kitchen at the sound of voices, wiping her hands on a tea towel. She was thin in a way that didn't match her husband, anxious thin, stretched thin. She looked at Makima with eyes that flickered immediately to the clipboard. "Who is this?" she said to Vernon, though she was looking at Makima. "Child welfare," Vernon said. "Routine visit." "We don't need, Mrs. Desley," Makima said pleasantly. "Could you point me toward your nephew, please?" The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. Makima had spent long enough around humans to catalog them, the silence of grief, the silence of guilt, the silence of people trying to remember what lie they'd told and to whom. This silence was that last kind. Petunia Desley's jaw tightened. He's not, I can find him myself, Makima said. But it would be helpful for your file if you cooperated. She was already turning toward the hallway. She didn't need them to show her. She could feel him, the way she could feel any significant concentration of power, a warmth at the edge of her awareness, like standing near something that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. The source of it was below her. She looked down. There was a small door under the stairs. A cupboard, from the shape of it. The kind of door you'd use to store coats and vacuum cleaners and the things you didn't want to look at. There was a lock on it. Not a deadbolt, something added after the fact, a sliding bolt at the top of the door, high enough that a child couldn't reach it from the inside. Makima looked at the bolt for a moment. Behind her, Vernon was saying something. His voice had taken on the tone of a man who had realized too late that he'd made an error and was now trying to reverse it without appearing to panic. She wasn't listening to him. She slid the bolt open, crouched slightly, and opened the cupboard door. The boy inside did not flinch. That was the first thing she registered. A child in a dark cupboard, suddenly exposed to light and a stranger's face, every instinct should have triggered a flinch, a scramble backward, some expression of fear. He didn't flinch. He went still, which was different. He sat on a thin mattress that had been pushed against the back wall, knees drawn up, wearing clothes that were clearly not his, too large, the collar of the shirt hanging off one shoulder, and he looked at her. His eyes were green. Extraordinarily green, even in the low light. And they were calm in a way that should not have been possible for a child who looked to be no older than 6. There was something behind that calm, not happiness, not peace, but the particular steadiness of someone who had decided a long time ago that their face wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of showing what was underneath it. She recognized that decision. She'd made it herself. There was a small shelf above the mattress. On it, a broken toy soldier, a stub of crayon, and 3 small rocks arranged in a deliberate line. He'd made his space orderly. He'd made it his, with almost nothing. "Hello," Makima said. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. "My name is Makima," she said. She didn't offer the false name this time. Something about his eyes made the lie feel unnecessary. "What's yours?" He studied her for another moment. She got the distinct impression he was running some internal calculation, assessing her, deciding how much of himself to extend. "Harry," he said. His voice was low for a child, unhurried. "Harry Potter. How long have you been in here, Harry?" He glanced at the small, high window at the far end of the cupboard, more of a vent than a window, really, barely enough to tell dark from light. "Since yesterday," he said. "For this time. I'm usually let out for school and chores." The phrasing, "for this time," told her everything about how routine this was. She filed it, let nothing show in her expression. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head once. A precise, economical movement. Then, after a beat, "Why are you here?" "I was following something," she said. "An energy signature. I thought it might be a place. It turned out to be you." Something moved in his eyes, not surprise exactly, but a shift, like a door opening a fraction. "What kind of energy?" "Magic," she said. He didn't react to the word the way most children would, no excitement, no skepticism, no giggling. He just kept looking at her. "Is that what it is?" he said, and it wasn't quite a question. "You know what I'm talking about," she said. "Strange things happen," he said. "Around me. My aunt says it's wrong. My uncle says it's unnatural." A pause. "I don't think it's wrong. I think it just is." Makima was quiet for a moment. Rain tapped against the small window. From the hallway behind her she could hear Vernon breathing in a way that suggested he was building up to something. She didn't turn around. "Would you like to come with me?" she asked. Harry Potter looked at her with those green eyes, and she watched him think about it. Not frantically, deliberately, like he was turning the question over to examine all its sides. "Where?" he said. "London. For now. And after that?" "That depends on you." Another of those long, assessing silences. The rocks on his shelf. The broken toy soldier. The crayon stub. 6 years old and he'd built a life inside a cupboard with the things he'd managed to keep. "All right," he said. He stood up. He was small for his age, underfed, she noted clinically, though she'd expected that, with dark, unruly hair and a scar on his forehead in the rough shape of a lightning bolt that she hadn't seen referenced in any file. He straightened his oversized shirt with a dignity that was almost formal, picked up the 3 rocks from the shelf, and put them in his pocket. Then he looked at her and waited. Makima stood, turned, and walked back into the hallway. Vernon was there. He'd gotten himself into a state in the time she'd been in the cupboard, face flushed, fists thick at his sides, the particular posture of a man who was used to being able to make problems go away through size and volume. Behind him on the stairs, the piggy-faced boy sat watching, and from the kitchen doorway Petunia's thin face was arranged in something that was trying to be defiant and not succeeding. "Now just a moment," Vernon started. "You can't just come in here and, Mr. Dursley," Makima said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something in the way she said his name that made the rest of his sentence stop existing. It wasn't loud. It was just, complete. Like a door being shut very quietly in a very still room. Vernon's mouth closed. "Harry is coming with me," she said. "He won't be returning." She reached into her coat and placed a card on the hallway table, blank, white, with a single phone number on it. "If you have any questions, you may call that number. Someone will answer. They'll explain the relevant sections of the agreement you signed in 1981. Petunia made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a protest. Her eyes had gone to Harry, standing in the cupboard doorway, and something complicated was moving across her face. Not affection. Not quite guilt. Something adjacent to relief that she was trying not to let anyone see. Harry was looking at his aunt. He held her gaze for a moment, and there was nothing soft in it, nothing pleading. Just that same quiet steadiness. Then he looked away. "Is there anything you'd like to take?" Makima asked him. He thought about it. "No," he said. They walked out of 4 Privet Drive together. The door closed behind them. The rain was still falling and Harry didn't have a coat, so Makima took off hers and held it over him without comment, which was a gesture so unlike her standard operating behavior that she noticed it and filed it under anomalous responses, subject, unknown. Harry looked up at her from under the coat as they walked. "What's a public safety operative?" he asked. She glanced down at him. "How did you, your badge," he said. "Inside your coat. I saw it when you moved." She was quiet for a moment. "We deal with supernatural threats," she said. "Things that hurt people. We stop them." "Devils," he said. "Among other things." "You've heard of devils?" "No," he said. "But I've felt things. At night, sometimes. Like something heavy in the air." He paused. "I didn't know what they were called." "Now you do." They reached her car, a dark, unremarkable sedan, and she opened the passenger door for him. He got in, sat up straight, and put his seatbelt on with the careful concentration of someone who'd had to figure things out for himself. She got in the driver's side, started the engine, and pulled out of Privet Drive. "Makima," Harry said, after a few minutes of watching Surrey slide past the window. "Yes." "Why me?" "You said you were following energy. You could have just filed a report." "I could have," she agreed. "But you didn't." "No." He waited. "The energy I found in that house," she said, "was unlike anything I've logged in 14 years of this work. Raw, unbound, enormous. And it was coming from a 6-year-old in a cupboard. She paused. I don't file reports on things like that. I go and look at them myself. Harry was quiet. He turned the statement over with that careful, unhurried quality she was already beginning to recognize as characteristic. So I'm a thing to look at, he said. At the moment, she said, you're a child in my car in the rain. What you are beyond that remains to be determined. He thought about that. Fair, he said. She didn't smile. But something in the set of her shoulders shifted, barely perceptible. She had expected fear, or gratitude, or the particular anxious chattiness of a child who'd been kept in a box and suddenly wanted to fill all available space with noise. She had expected, in short, the predictable. Harry Potter was not being predictable. She found that genuinely interesting. The safe house was in Southwark, wedged between a converted warehouse and a canal that smelled like London pretending it didn't. From the outside it looked like a narrow Victorian terraced house that needed its gutters cleaned. From the inside it was something else, 3 floors, sparse and functional, the walls of the second floor lined with file cabinets and equipment she didn't explain, the kitchen stocked with the kind of thoroughness that suggested Makima had made a call from the car while Harry was watching the motorway go by. She showed him the room on the top floor. Small. Clean. A bed with adequate blankets, a window that faced the canal, a desk and a lamp. More than he'd had. She watched his face when he walked in and saw the window, saw light, accessible and unlatched, and saw the thing he didn't let his face show, which was everything. Is this mine? He asked. Yes. He put his 3 rocks on the windowsill. Stood back. Looked at the arrangement for a moment. Thank you, he said, and the words were as careful and deliberate as everything else about him. There are rules, she said. He turned from the window. Tell me. You don't go outside alone until I say you can. You don't use your magic without telling me first. You eat everything I give you. You're underweight and that changes as of tonight. You sleep enough. You tell me when you're injured. He listened without interrupting. And in return, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Most adults she told things to didn't ask in return. He'd framed it as a negotiation, which meant he understood it was one. In return, she said, I teach you what I know. Which is considerable. About magic? About everything. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Agreed, he said. She left him to the room. In the hallway she stood for a moment and let herself register what had just happened, the particular quality of the exchange, the absence of the expected. He'd shaken on a deal without knowing the full terms, which should have indicated recklessness. But his face had said something different. His face had said he'd already assessed the known quantities, calculated the gamble, and decided it was worth taking. 6 years old. She walked downstairs and called Kishibe. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which was his way of communicating that he'd seen it was her and had briefly considered not answering. There's a development, she said. Those are my least favorite words, Kishibe said. His voice had the texture of someone who'd been smoking since before smoking was understood to be a problem and wasn't interested in changing. I found the energy signature in Surrey. And? It was a child. 6 years old. Significant raw magical output, I'd estimate high spectrum, possibly beyond anything currently on record. He was living in a cupboard under the stairs. A pause. You left him there and filed a report. I brought him home. A longer pause. She could hear him exhale, not a sigh exactly, more the sound of a man who had worked with Makima long enough to recognize the early symptoms of a situation that was going to require his personal involvement. You brought a 6-year-old child to a public safety safe house, he said. Yes. Why? Because I wanted to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Another pause, this one with a different quality. What's his name? Kishibe said. Harry Potter. She heard him set something down on his end, a glass, by the sound. "Makima," he said, and his voice had shifted from dry to careful, the way it did when he was being serious without being loud. "That name is in the European Division files. He's flagged. Has been since 1981. I know. There are people who will look for him. I know that too. The wizarding world will have to manage their expectations," she said. Another very long pause. Then, "I'll be on the morning train," Kishibe said, and hung up. Upstairs, she could hear movement, quiet, careful. Harry walking around his room. She heard the window open a crack, presumably to listen to the rain on the canal. Then, after a moment, she heard him moving again, to the desk, she thought, based on the scrape of the chair. There was silence for a long time after that. Not the silence of sleep. The silence of someone thinking very hard and not wanting anyone to know it. She went to her office on the second floor and opened the file she'd been building since leaving Surrey. She added notes. Observations. The precise quality of the energy she'd felt at the house, the exact expression on his face when she'd offered to take him, the rocks on the windowsill. She was meticulous about records. She had long since learned that the things most people dismissed as small details were the only details that ever truly mattered. Subject, Harry Potter, age 6. Magical signature, unclassified, upper range. Temperament, unusual. Shows no identifiable fear response. High pattern recognition. Negotiation instinct present even at current developmental stage. Adaptive. Will require custom approach. She paused with her pen over the page. Personal note, his eyes are the same color as the energy I tracked from the street. That is almost certainly not coincidental. She closed the file. In the kitchen she made 2 bowls of rice and chicken because it was what was in the refrigerator and because she hadn't eaten since the train and because she suspected Harry hadn't eaten since whenever the Dursleys had last found it convenient. She carried both upstairs and knocked on his door. "Come in," he said immediately. No hesitation, he'd heard her coming. He was sitting at the desk with a piece of paper and a crayon. He'd brought it after all, she noted, the single item from his shelf he'd said no to and then taken anyway. He'd drawn something. She didn't look at it directly, she set the bowl in front of him and stood back. He looked at the food. Then he ate, not desperately, not the ravenous speed of a truly starving child, but steadily, with the careful focus of someone who was very hungry and had decided not to embarrass themselves about it. She sat on the edge of his bed with her own bowl and ate too. After a while, "What did you draw?" she asked. He turned the paper around. It was a map. Rough, crayon, inaccurate in scale but recognizable, he'd drawn the stretch of motorway they'd taken from Surrey to London, marking exits and the canal and the position of the house relative to the nearest bridge. He'd done it from memory, from a single-car journey at dusk, in less than an hour. She looked at the map for a moment. "You have a strong spatial memory," she said. "I like knowing where I am," he said. "And how to get out." She set her bowl down. She looked at him, this small boy with his green eyes and his spatial memory and his 3 rocks on the windowsill, and she felt something move through her assessment of the situation, something she couldn't immediately categorize. Not warmth exactly. Something more like the feeling of standing in front of something enormous and not yet being able to see its full shape. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow starts early." "What happens tomorrow?" "You begin." "Begin what?" She picked up her bowl and walked to the door. "Everything," she said, and closed it gently behind her. Harry Potter sat at his desk in his room, with its window and its canal sounds and its adequate blankets, and looked at his map for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully, tucked it into the pocket with his 3 rocks, and went to bed. He didn't sleep for a long time. But he wasn't afraid. He was thinking. Outside, London moved in its usual way, cabs and rain and the canal lapping at its stones, and in a house in Surrey a man named Vernon Desley looked at a blank white card with a phone number on it and decided, after a long moment, to put it in the kitchen drawer and never speak of any of it again. In a castle in Scotland, behind half-moon spectacles, an old man who had been watching the magical traces of a boy he'd placed in Surrey 10 years before opened his eyes suddenly from a light doze and sat very still. The trace had moved. He reached for his quill. In Southwark, in the narrow house by the canal, Makima sat at her desk and wrote in a file, and in the room above her, Harry Potter turned over in his adequate blankets and listened to the rain and thought about maps and exits and the color of a woman's eyes and the fact that, for the first time in his memory, there was no lock on the outside of his door. He thought that was probably significant. He put it in the category of things to understand later, closed his eyes, and slept. Chapter 2, The Shape of a Weapon. Kishibe arrived at 7:43 in the morning, which was 7 minutes earlier than his train should have allowed, and he smelled like cigarettes and the particular kind of coffee that comes from a thermos a man has been carrying for years without washing properly. He knocked once and let himself in with the spare key Makima kept under the third stone to the left of the front step, a detail she had told him exactly once, 4 years ago, and which he'd never acknowledged remembering until this moment. Harry was in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter eating toast with the focused efficiency of someone who decided that breakfast was a task to be completed rather than a pleasure to be had, wearing clothes that fit him. Makima had been thorough about the kitchen and apparently equally thorough about the clothing situation, and he had a book open on the counter beside him that he was reading while he ate. Not a children's book. Kishibe squinted at the spine from the doorway. Fundamentals of Kinetic Energy. 3rd edition. The boy was 6. Kishibe put his bag down in the hallway and walked into the kitchen. Harry looked up from the book, looked at him with those green eyes that Makima had mentioned but which were still somehow more startling in person, the color of them, and the quality of the attention behind them, and then looked back at his book. "You're Kishibe," Harry said. He turned a page. "How do you know that?" "She described you last night." A pause. "And you have a public safety badge, same as hers." "Different rank." Kishibe looked down at his coat. His badge was inside a pocket. The outline of it was faintly visible through the fabric if you knew exactly where to look, at an angle, in decent light. He'd worked with senior devil hunters for 15 years who hadn't caught that. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. He studied the boy. The boy continued eating toast and reading about kinetic energy without seeming to need anything from him. "What did she tell you about me?" Kishibe asked. Harry turned another page. "That you're the best devil hunter still active in the European division. That you've survived longer than anyone in your field, which means either you're extremely good or extremely lucky, and that you yourself believe it's the latter, which she thinks is false modesty." He paused. "She said you'd argue with everything she does with me on principle, and that I should listen to your arguments because they're usually worth hearing, even when she overrules them." Kishibe was quiet for a long moment. Then he went to the counter, found a mug, poured himself coffee, and sat back down. "She said that," he said. "More or less." Harry closed the book, having apparently finished what he needed from it. He looked at Kishibe directly. "You don't think I should be here?" "No," Kishibe said, because lying to someone who was going to see through it was a waste of both their time. "You're 6 years old. You should be in school. Somewhere normal, with other children." "I was," Harry said. "Normal school. They put me in a cupboard when I wasn't there." Kishibe looked at him. Harry's face was even, unhurried, not performing anything. He'd stated a fact and was waiting to see what Kishibe did with it. Kishibe drank his coffee. It tasted terrible. "Fair point," he said. Makima came downstairs at 8, dressed and precise, carrying 3 folders under one arm and a cup of tea in her other hand. She looked at Kishibe at the table and Harry standing at the counter and the specific quality of the silence between them, and something almost like approval moved through her expression. "Good," she said. "You've met." "He read my badge through my coat," Kishibe said. Yes, she said, as though this was not surprising. She set the folders on the table and opened the top one. Harry. Come here. Harry came and stood beside her at the table, looking at the open folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance shots, energy readings, printed charts with curves and peaks that meant nothing in isolation. This is what a magical energy signature looks like when we log it, Makima said. She tapped a chart. This is a standard reading. Stable, contained, the kind of output we see from trained adult practitioners. She moved her finger to the next page. This is what we logged in Surrey 3 days ago. The chart was almost off the page. The curve didn't behave like the first one, it didn't peak and settle, it kept climbing, fractaling, reaching in multiple directions simultaneously like something that didn't know what shape it was supposed to be. Harry looked at it. That's me, he said. That's you, she confirmed. Uncontrolled. Reactive. Responding to emotional states rather than intention. She closed the folder. Raw energy on that scale isn't power. It's noise. You can't aim noise. So you're going to teach me to aim it. I'm going to teach you to be quiet, she said. And then, once you're quiet, we'll talk about aim. Kishaib watched Harry process this. The boy didn't bristle at the word quiet the way most would, he seemed to understand what she meant by it. Not silence. Stillness. The difference between a river and a flood. How? Harry said. Makima set her tea down and pulled out the chair across from him. She sat. Tell me what it feels like, she said. When the magic happens. Harry sat too. He thought about the question with the same unhurried deliberateness he applied to everything, which Kishaib was already finding both impressive and mildly unnerving. Like something that was pressed flat suddenly standing up, he said. Like, he paused, like when you're very cold and you come inside and the warmth comes back into your hands. But the other way. Going out instead of in. Makima was looking at him with an expression Kishaib had never quite seen on her face before. Not surprise, she didn't really do surprise. More like the look of someone solving a puzzle who has just turned a piece over and found it fits perfectly. When does it happen most? She asked. When I'm angry, he said. Or scared. Mostly angry. He thought about it. In the cupboard sometimes, when it was dark for a long time, things would move. The shelf. The door would rattle. A beat. I didn't mean for it to. That's the problem, she said. You didn't mean for it. Magic that responds to emotion is useful the way a fire in the street is useful, occasionally, by accident, when the things around it happen to need burning. We're going to teach it to respond to intention instead. She reached across the table and placed a small glass of water between them. It was perfectly still. Move it, she said. Harry looked at the glass. He looked at Makima. He looked back at the glass. Kishaib could see him reaching for the feeling she described, the pressing flat sensation, the warmth going out. He could see the effort on the boy's face, a concentration that went all the way down. The glass rattled once. A small, abrupt vibration. The water sloshed but didn't spill. Then nothing. Harry frowned. Again, Makima said. Her voice was level, no impatience in it, no encouragement either. Just the word. He tried again. The glass moved, a fraction, maybe 2 centimeters to the left, and then stopped, and Harry let out a breath through his nose that suggested frustration he wasn't going to voice. What were you thinking about? Makima asked. Moving it, Harry said. You were thinking about moving it, she said. That's different from intending it. When you moved things in the cupboard, you weren't thinking about anything. You were feeling something, and the magic followed the feeling without asking for your permission. She held his gaze. Right now you're asking the magic to do something. I need you to stop asking and start deciding. Harry was still for a long moment. Then his expression changed, a very small change, barely visible, something resolving in him rather than tensing. He looked at the glass with a different quality of attention. Not a request. A decision. The glass slid cleanly across the table and stopped against the wall with a soft tick. Kishibe's eyebrows went up. Makima looked at the glass and then back at Harry. "Good," she said. "Now do it again. And again after that. Every time, same quality of intention. We're building a reflex." Harry pulled the glass back from the wall with a gesture that was already slightly smoother than the first. Then again. Then again. Kishibe drank his terrible coffee and watched this happen and decided that he was going to stay for longer than he'd planned. The days took on a shape. Mornings were theory, not magic theory specifically, not yet, but the underpinnings of force and motion and energy transfer that Makima insisted Harry understand before he touched anything more complex. She had opinions about people who could do things without understanding why, and those opinions were unflattering. She pulled books from the second-floor shelves with the calm selectivity of someone who'd been deciding what Harry Potter needed before he'd arrived, which he probably had. Harry consumed them. Not quickly. Kishibe had worked with prodigies before, the eager-to-impress type who raced through material to get to the next thing, but thoroughly. Harry read something and then went back and read it again. He asked questions that went sideways, that came at the material from angles Makima hadn't anticipated, which was apparently not something that happened to her often, based on the quality of her responses when it did. Why does intention change the physical expression of the energy if the energy output is the same? If devils respond to fear, and magic responds to emotion, are they the same type of force at a different frequency? You said uncontrolled magic is noise. Is controlled magic music or silence? She answered the first two. The third one she looked at for a moment with an expression Kishibe couldn't read, and then she said, neither. It's language. She handed him 2 more books. Afternoons were physical. Kishibe handled the afternoons. He hadn't planned to, he'd come to Surrey to argue with Makima about the ethics of what she was doing and then get back on the train, but somewhere in the first 48 hours that plan had revised itself without asking him. He started Harry on something that wasn't quite martial arts and wasn't quite devil hunter training and was mostly built around the philosophy that a body that knew what it was doing wouldn't panic, and a body that didn't panic gave the mind room to work. Harry was not naturally gifted at this, which Kishibe found reassuring. He was small and underfed and his coordination was that of a child who'd spent most of his life in a confined space. He fell down a lot. He fell down without complaining, which was better. He fell, he assessed what had gone wrong, he got up and adjusted. By the end of the first week he was falling down significantly less. You're angry at your feet, Kishibe told him, after a particularly ungraceful stumble across the cleared space on the ground floor that had become their training room. I'm not angry at anything, Harry said, getting up. You are. You expect them to already know what to do, so when they don't, you blame them. He crossed his arms. Your feet are not the problem. Your expectations are. Harry stood up straight and looked at him with those eyes. A pause. My uncle said something like that once, he said. He said I was the problem. Kishibe met the boy's gaze and held it. Your uncle, he said, is an idiot who kept a child in a cupboard. I'm saying your expectations are the problem. Those are different things. Harry thought about that carefully. Then he reset his stance, planted his feet, and tried the movement again. This time he stayed upright. There, Kishibe said. They worked in silence for a while. After some time Harry said, without breaking the movement he was practicing, did Makima tell you why she really took me? Not the energy signature thing. The real reason. Kishibe paused. He studied the boy's back, the set of his small shoulders. No, he said, which was the truth. Do you know? I have theories. What are they? Kishibe picked up his coffee, a fresh cup, which was only marginally less terrible than the first, and thought about how to answer this. Harry had stopped moving and was looking at him now, and the quality of the look was that of someone who wanted the real answer and would know if he got a managed one. Makima collects things, Kishibe said. Things with power. Things she finds interesting. Usually the two qualities overlap. He paused. You have more raw magical energy than anything she's logged in 14 years of this job. That's the official reason. And unofficially? I think you didn't flinch, Kishibe said. When she opened the cupboard. I think that surprised her. He drank his coffee. Makima is not accustomed to being surprised. Harry was quiet. He turned back to his stance. She surprises me too, he said. How so? I thought she'd want me to be afraid of her, Harry said. Adults usually do. It makes them feel safer. He tried the movement again, clean and correct. She doesn't seem to need that. Kishibe looked at the boy for a long moment. No, he said quietly. She doesn't need fear. That's what makes her dangerous. Harry landed a clean sequence, stopped, looked up. Am I supposed to be scared of her? Most people are. Are you? Kishibe thought about this longer than necessary. I'm careful, he said. That's not the same thing. Harry considered this. I'll be careful then, he said. And went back to his footwork with an air of having settled the matter. 3 months in, Makima decided Harry was ready for the second step. She took him to the roof of the building after dark. Southwark at night was sound and light and the canal below gleaming with it, and Harry stood at the low wall at the edge and looked out at London with an expression of someone who had only just been given permission to understand how large things were. Makima stood a few feet back and watched him. The glass, she said. Small object. Clear intention. You've done it clean for 4 weeks now. Yes, he said. He didn't look away from the city. Tonight something different. She reached into her coat and produced a short length of rope, tied in a loose knot. She set it on the wall beside him. Untie it. He looked at the rope. With my hands? No. He looked at it differently. He reached for the quality she'd taught him, not a request, a decision, and the knot loosened and the rope fell open in a clean line. It took him about 4 seconds. Again, she said. She knotted it. He opened it. She knotted it again, more tightly. He took 7 seconds this time. What slowed you down? The tightness, he said. I had to think about which direction first. Magic doesn't care about direction, she said. That's not a physical constraint. That's your brain imposing a physical logic onto something that doesn't require one. She picked up the rope, knotted it so tightly the ends barely moved. Don't untie it. Destroy the knot. He blinked. Destroy it? It's a concept. Not a physical thing. The rope exists. The knot is just the rope arranged a certain way. Stop thinking about physical untying and think about the state of the rope. She set it back on the wall. What does the knot need to stop being a knot? Harry looked at the rope. He looked at it for longer this time, not the careful deliberate look of working towards something but a different quality of looking, like he was seeing past the physical object to the principle underneath it. His head tilted slightly, a habit Kishibe had started calling his thinking tilt. The rope went straight. Knot loosened, straight, the knot resolving instantaneously, both ends dropping free, as though the concept of its being knotted had simply been withdrawn. Harry stared at it. That felt different, he said. It was different. Makima picked up the rope. You've been manipulating objects. That was you manipulating a state. Broader application. Less energy, more precision. She held the rope out and he took it. Practice that principle. Extend it. To what? She looked out over the city. Everything, she said. Locks. Structures. Peoples, she paused, physical states. She looked back at him. Not people. Not yet. Understand the principle first. Harry held the rope and turned it over in his hands, reknotting it and straightening it and reknotting it again with a focus that was starting to look like joy, which was an expression Kishibe had not seen on him before. There was something loosening in the boy's face when he practiced, the careful watchfulness easing back just slightly, the controlled steadiness giving way to something more like actual presence. Kishibe had started to understand, happiest when he was figuring something out. What about the wizarding world? Harry asked, without looking up from the rope. He'd started doing this, inserting questions at angles, not as confrontations but as pieces of a puzzle he was assembling. The energy signature you followed. It's not what devils are made of. No, Makima said. Different source. Different nature. But they interact. Devils are drawn to high-density magical signatures, which is part of why I monitor them. Is that why the scar happened? He touched his forehead. The man who killed my parents. Makima was quiet for a moment. Kishibe, leaning against the door to the stairwell, watched her face with attention. This was the question she'd been waiting for, he thought, and she'd been deciding what to give him. Your parents were killed by a wizard, she said. Not a devil. His name was Voldemort. He is, a practitioner who had pushed the limits of what magic can do so far past any natural boundary that something in him fractured. What you have in your forehead is the record of that fracture making contact with you. She looked at him. He tried to kill you. It didn't work. Why not? We don't fully know, she said. The leading theory involves your mother. What she did when she stood between him and you. A certain kind of intention, a certain quality of it, can act as a barrier. She paused. A state, she said, rather than an action. Do you understand the distinction? He looked up from the rope. She didn't just try to protect me, he said slowly. She was my protection. The state of her choosing to die for me became a property of me. He turned this over. Like the knot. She changed my state. Makima looked at him. Yes, she said. Exactly like that. Harry was quiet. He looked at the rope in his hands. He reknotted it very deliberately, held it, felt the state of the knot, and then withdrew the concept of it. The rope fell straight. I want to learn everything, he said. It wasn't a request and it wasn't gratitude. It was a statement of intent, the same quality as when he moved the glass. I know, Makima said. 6 months in, Kishibe stopped telling himself he was leaving soon. He moved his things from the hotel he'd been maintaining as a theoretical exit into the top floor of the safe house, into the room across the hall from Harry's, and he did this without announcing it or explaining it, and Makima said nothing about it, which was her way of saying she'd expected it. He and Harry developed their own rhythms in the mornings before Makima came down. Kishibe cooked badly but earnestly. He'd grown up with the philosophy that food made from scratch was more honest than food made from convenience, regardless of how it tasted, and Harry ate what was put in front of him and offered critiques that were blunt enough to be useful and delivered with a straight face that made them funny despite themselves. This tastes like the concept of an egg, Harry said one morning, examining a scrambled egg that had indeed gone philosophically wrong. Eat it, Kishibe said. I am eating it. I'm just noting what it tastes like. I could put you back in a cupboard. The egg does taste better than a cupboard. Harry ate it without further comment, then read, and Kishibe made himself tea that was better than his eggs and sat across from him, and they were quiet together in the specific comfortable way of two people who had no performance obligations toward each other. Harry was growing. Not quickly, he'd started too far behind for quick to be an option, but steadily. The clothes that had fit him in October were too short by March. He was filling out, the sharp angles of malnutrition giving way to something more like the normal construction of a 7-year-old boy. He still didn't smile easily, but he'd developed a dry, almost accidental humor that surfaced most often with Kishibe, and that Kishibe found himself manufacturing opportunities to draw out, though he would not have said so aloud. In their afternoon sessions, Harry had progressed from falling down regularly to not falling down and from not falling down to being genuinely hard to unbalance. He was too small for real combat work. Kishibe was not going to teach a 7-year-old to fight, no matter what Makima's program said, but he could move, could read intent in another person's body before it became action, could slip sideways under a line of force in the way that small people learn when they figure out that resistance against size is a losing proposition. He was also, Kishibe had noticed, watching everything. All the time. Not anxiously, not with the hypervigilance of a child who'd learned the world was dangerous and couldn't stop monitoring it. More like a naturalist. Harry watched the way things worked and catalogued them and filed the information for later in a way that was so consistent and unremarkable that you almost didn't notice it until you said something in passing, and 3 weeks later he referenced it with complete accuracy. "You said something about the knife devil," Harry said one afternoon, about 7 months in, lacing his boots after training. 4 weeks ago. "You said its energy pattern had a structural weakness." Kishibe looked up from his own shoes. "I did. In passing. I wasn't explaining it. I know. But I was thinking about it and I think the weakness might be directional. Based on how you described the way it collapsed, do you have the incident file?" Kishibe stared at him. He was 7 years old and asking to review Devil Hunter incident files. Kishibe got the file. He spread it on the floor between them, and they sat cross-legged on the training room floor while Harry worked through the report with a focused patience that Kishibe recognized. It was the same quality he applied to the knot on the roof, to the footwork, to everything. He asked questions. Kishibe answered. He asked better questions. Kishibe found himself answering those too, and then asking his own, because Harry had spotted something in the energy pattern data that Kishibe had passed over, and it was, in fact, directional. "You're not allowed to be this perceptive," Kishibe told him. "I'm just reading what's there," Harry said, moving to the next page. "I've been doing this for 30 years and I missed that." Harry looked up, briefly, with an expression that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "You weren't looking for it," he said, and went back to the report. Kishibe said nothing. He picked up his terrible coffee and drank it and thought about what it meant that a 7-year-old had just, very gently, told him that experience was not the same as attention. And that the thing he'd felt at the first was right, this boy was going to be something extraordinary, and the question wasn't whether Makima's instinct had been correct. It was whether any of them were equipped for what they were growing. The end of the first year came in summer, with heat and canal smell and Harry's 7th birthday, which none of them had been tracking except that Makima had, silently, and on the morning of the 31st of July there was a book on the kitchen table. Not a birthday card. Not a gift-wrapped present. A book, thick, worn, with a dark cover and no title on the spine. Harry sat down at breakfast, saw it, picked it up. He opened it. The pages were covered in dense text and diagrams, not a published book, a compiled one, handwritten in 2 different scripts that Harry recognized after a moment as Makima's and, in the margins, Kishibe's. "What is this?" he asked. Makima was making tea with her back to him. "Notes," she said. "Observations. Theory. What we know about magical energy and devil interactions and the gaps between established understanding and what actually happens." She didn't turn around. "The gaps are where the interesting work is." Harry turned the pages. There were sections in Makima's handwriting that were analytical, precise, structured, and sections in Kishibe's margins that were blunter, more personal, pointing at Makima's conclusions with question marks and arrows and occasional single-word rebuttals that made the whole thing read like a long argument between 2 people who disagreed about everything and had been doing so for years. Near the back, in Makima's handwriting, he found a section headed Subject HP, Observed Capabilities and Theoretical Extension. Below that, in Kishibe's margin, He's a child, not a subject. Below that, in Makima's hand, He can be both. Harry looked at that for a long moment. Then he looked up. Kishibe was leaning in the doorway with his coffee, watching him read, and his expression had the specific quality of someone waiting to see what another person does with a thing they've been given. "Thank you," Harry said to both of them. He said it to the room, not directed, which managed to land on both of them at once. Makima turned from the counter and looked at him with her level, golden eyes. "Year 2 starts tomorrow," she said. "We're going to start with something new." "What?" "People," she said. Harry held her gaze. "You said not yet." "That was 6 months ago," she said. "Your state work is clean enough. Now we discuss the application." She picked up her tea. "Magic can change the state of a physical thing, you've demonstrated that. A person is a physical thing." Harry was quiet. "Not control," she said. "Not coercion. Understanding. Reading the state of something and understanding what it needs to change." She looked at him over her cup. "The difference is intention." "My mother understood that," Harry said. "Yes," Makima said. "She did." Harry looked at the book in his hands. At the section subject HP and the margin note he's a child, not a subject. He was 7 years old, sitting in a kitchen in Southwark with a compiled book of original research written for him by a devil hunter and a control devil on his birthday, and outside the window London was going about its enormous ordinary business, and somewhere in Scotland an old man with a quill was writing letters that hadn't reached him yet, and somewhere in Surrey a blank white card sat in a kitchen drawer, and his 3 rocks were on the windowsill upstairs where they'd been for a year. He opened the book to the first page and started reading. Chapter 3, What Devils Know the Fear Devil Found Them on a Tuesday. Harry was 8, and he'd been in the middle of a disagreement with Kishibe about the structural integrity of a specific defensive stance when the temperature in the training room dropped by roughly 10 degrees and the lights, not flickering, not dimming, just gone, pulled from the room the way sound gets pulled from a space before something large moves through it, went out completely. Kishibe was on his feet before the last of the light died. Harry was already standing. "Stay behind me," Kishibe said. "I can feel it," Harry said. He wasn't moving behind Kishibe. He was facing the far wall, where the cold was coming from, his head at that thinking tilt, reading the room. "It's big. I know it's big. Behind me, Harry." "It's afraid," Harry said. Kishibe stopped. "What?" "The devil. It's afraid." Harry turned to look at him, briefly, and even in the dark Kishibe could see the focus on his face, not fear, the same absence of fear that had unsettled him from the beginning, just that clear and total attention. "I can feel the quality of it. Fear devils carry their nature with them. But this one, underneath what it's projecting," he turned back to the wall, "it's scared of something. Devils don't get scared. This one does." The wall dissolved. That was the only way to describe it. It didn't break or blow in, it simply ceased to be a barrier, and through the space where it had been came the fear devil, which Kishibe had encountered twice in his career and which he had notes on that said, in his own handwriting, "Do not engage without backup. Do not engage without backup. Do not engage without backup." It was tall enough to fill the room from floor to ceiling. It had no consistent shape, it kept almost being something, cycling through forms that the human brain recognized without completing, things glimpsed at the edge of vision and never confirmed. What it projected was primal and total, the certainty that you were prey, that you had always been prey, that whatever had been hunting you had just arrived. Kishibe felt it hit him like a physical thing. He'd been trained for it, Makima had spent months calibrating his responses, but it still landed, still sent his heart into his throat. Harry didn't move. The fear devil stopped. In Kishibe's experience, devils didn't stop. They didn't recalibrate. They found the human fear signature, they locked onto it, they moved toward it with the single-minded efficiency of something that had been doing only one thing for centuries. They did not stop and look at you. This one was looking at Harry. Harry looked back. "You came here," Harry said, to the devil. His voice was the same as always, unhurried, not loud. The voice he used when he was working through a problem. You didn't come for us specifically. You came here because something drove you here. He tilted his head. What's chasing you? The fear devil made a sound that wasn't language but also wasn't not language, something that vibrated in the structure of the building, in the bones, a sound that meant wrong and back and not this place, and it flickered at the edges, its form destabilizing. Harry, Kishibe said carefully. He had his chain in his hands, the reinforced length he carried without thinking about it the way other people carried keys. Step back. It's going to leave, Harry said. It doesn't want to be here. It wants, he stopped. His expression shifted, a rapid reassessment. Kishibe. There's something behind it. Something that scared it into a building at random. That's not behavior, that's retreat. Kishibe turned his eyes from the fear devil, which took effort, the thing's presence was like gravity, and scanned the broken wall. Through it, the hallway was dark, but at the far end, through the front window, he could see the street outside. And on the street, down, he said, and he grabbed Harry and they hit the floor as something came through the front of the building. It wasn't a devil. It hit with the physical force of one, plaster and timber and the front wall of the safe house opening like a mouth, but what stood in the debris was a person. Or something wearing the shape of one. Tall, dressed in what had been a suit before it became structural damage, with a face that was too smooth and too still and eyes that had no white in them at all. A fiend. Kishibe recognized the category in the first second even though he'd never encountered this specific entity. A devil in a human corpse, and this one had been in the body long enough that the personality had eroded and only the hunger remained. The fear devil, in the wreckage of the training room wall, made itself briefly as small as something that size could make itself and pressed into the corner. The fiend looked at Harry. Harry was already standing. Kishibe put himself between them, instinct, training, a year and a half of watching this boy and knowing that he would walk forward into things without enough information, but Harry stepped around him with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for an 8-year-old, moving sideways and forward simultaneously, not running at the fiend, just repositioning so that the angle changed, so that Kishibe was no longer between them. Harry, the chain won't work, Harry said. Look at the corpse. It's been a fiend for months, minimum. The physical integration is too advanced for standard separation tactics. He was looking at the fiend the way he looked at the incident files, the way he looked at any problem, trying to understand its state. The devil inside is, he paused. It's not afraid. It's angry. This is the thing that scared the fear devil. Something that scares a fear devil should not be engaged by an 8-year-old. I'm not going to fight it, Harry said. I'm going to, he stopped, clearly working through what he was about to do as he did it. The corpse is the problem. The corpse is what's giving it mobility and mass. If I change the state of the corpse, you said not people, Kishibe said. This person is already dead, Harry said, and his voice didn't change when he said it but something behind his eyes did, a compression, a weight that he acknowledged and then set aside because right now there was work to do. The devil won't be able to sustain the integration without the body. The fiend moved. It was fast, the wrong kind of fast, the fast of something that had no concern for what the body it was using could sustain, joints moving against their design, the stride of something that had stopped caring about the container. It covered half the room in a second. Harry raised one hand. He didn't gesture dramatically. He didn't say anything. He just decided. With the clean finality of the rope going straight on the rooftop, of the glass moving across the table, but scaled up in a way that Kishibe felt in his sternum. The fiend stopped. Not as though it had hit a wall, as though the concept of it continuing had been temporarily withdrawn. Its form shuddered, the human corpse's structure suddenly working against the energy inside it rather than housing it. The devil inside thrashed, and the body, already compromised, already past the point of anything, began to come apart at the joins. Harry held it. He was breathing harder. This was bigger than anything he'd done, not a rope, not a glass, not a lock, but the state of a complex biological and supernatural composite, and the effort was visible in the tension of his small frame. The fiend screamed, the devil voice, not the human voice, a sound that came from the frequency devils occupied, and then it dissolved, the energy releasing upward in a column that went through the ceiling without touching it, and the body collapsed, and the room was quiet. Harry lowered his hand. He breathed once, long and slow, the way Kishibe had taught him. Behind them, in its corner, the fear devil made the sound that wasn't language again, and Harry turned to look at it. "Go," he said. "Whatever was chasing that, go a different direction." The fear devil went. Kishibe stood in the wreckage of the training room with plaster in his hair and looked at the 8-year-old in front of him who had just unmade a fiend from the inside and told a fear devil to leave and was now checking his own hands with clinical attention, cataloging the physical feedback of what he'd done the way he cataloged everything. "Are you hurt?" Kishibe said. "No." Harry flexed his fingers. That was harder than expected. The internal states of living systems are more complex. Even post-death ones. He looked up. "You need to call Makima." "I am aware," Kishibe said. The fiend came from outside. Something drove it here, the same thing that scared the fear devil. That's not random and it's not local. Someone was directing it. He looked at the space where the front wall had been, open to the wet Southwark Street. "We're being looked at." "By whom?" Harry looked at him. "I don't know yet," he said. "But whoever it is knows where we live." Kishibe called Makima. She arrived in 11 minutes, which meant she'd been close, which meant she'd been expecting something. Kishibe filed that under things to raise later and focused on the immediate, which was the structural state of the safe house and the fact that the street outside was empty in the specific way that streets in London are not empty at 4 in the afternoon unless someone has applied effort to the situation. Makima walked through the debris without looking at it, which was her version of assessing it. She absorbed peripheral information without needing to turn her head, a quality that Kishibe had never entirely gotten used to. She stopped in the middle of the training room, looked at the space where the fiend had been, and then looked at Harry. "Tell me," she said. Harry told her. He was precise about it, the sequence, the fear devil's behavior, the fiend's physical state, his assessment of the integration timeline, what he'd done and how, and the conclusion about external direction. He delivered it the way he delivered everything, without padding, without seeking confirmation of his own conclusions, laying out the information and letting it sit. Makima listened without interrupting. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. "You held a complex composite state against active resistance," she said. "Yes." "You held it long enough for full dissolution." "Yes." "There was a point where I wasn't sure I could complete it." He said this without apology, just accuracy. "If it had been faster off the mark. Or if there had been 2 of them. I'd have needed more preparation time." "And what would you have done if the preparation time hadn't been available?" Harry thought about it. "I would have separated them. Not dissolved, separated. Released the devil from the corpse without full dissolution. It would have been less controlled but faster." "And the devil?" "Would have been free and angry," he said. "It wasn't ideal." "No," she agreed. "But it was the correct backup." She crouched, very briefly, and looked at the outline on the floor where the corpse had been. There was almost nothing left, the cellular structure had come apart completely in the dissolution. She stood. "You improvised correctly. The principles held under field conditions." "I wasn't in the field," Harry said. "The field came to us. They're the same thing." She looked at him with those golden eyes that never seemed to be doing only one thing at a time. "How do you feel?" Harry blinked. It was one of the few questions that seemed to catch him off guard, because Makima didn't ask it often and when she did there was always a specific reason she needed the answer. He ran a brief internal assessment, visible in the micropause. "Tired," he said. "The level of sustained intention required for something that size it's a different order of magnitude from objects. My focus held, but it cost more than I expected. That cost will reduce with practice, she said. I know. He looked at the collapsed wall. Someone sent that thing here. I know, she said. Who? She looked at him steadily. I have a strong suspicion, she said. But suspicion isn't the same as confirmation. When I have confirmation you'll know. Harry held her gaze. He was 8 years old and he held Makima's gaze the way Kishibe had never managed to do for more than about 30 seconds running. Is it the wizard, he said. The one from Scotland. Makima was quiet. I know about Dumbledore, Harry said. I found the file. Which file? Makima said. Her voice didn't change, which was its own kind of answer. The one labeled Miscellaneous European Contacts, Harry said. Folder 4. Bottom shelf of the second cabinet. He paused. The one with my name in it. And his. Kishibe made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He'd known about the file. He'd argued about the file. He had not known that Harry had found it. When? Makima said. 6 months ago. Harry was calm about it. I didn't read everything. I read enough to understand that there are people from the wizarding world who've been aware of where I am since approximately 2 months after you brought me here. And that you've been managing that awareness. A pause. I'm not angry about it. You should be, Kishibe said. Should I? Harry looked at him. She found me and brought me here and has been teaching me everything she knows for 1.5 years. She's also managing a political situation I didn't know existed before I could understand it well enough to not do something counterproductive. He looked back at Makima. Did I read the situation correctly? Substantially, she said. Then what would being angry accomplish? Kishibe opened his mouth and then closed it. He picked up his coffee, which had somehow survived the structural damage by being in the kitchen, and he drank it and said nothing because the boy had a point and the boy knew he had a point, and acknowledging this felt like capitulating to something he hadn't consented to. Dumbledore, Makima said, bringing it back, has been patient for 2 years because he believed the delay was temporary. He believed you would come to him, to Hogwarts, to the wizarding world, on a timeline he could manage. She walked to the open front wall and looked out at the Southwark Street. Something in the last month has shifted his timeline. What? Voldemort is moving again, she said. Which means Dumbledore needs you sooner than he planned. Harry was quiet. The name landed differently now than it had when she told him about it 2 years ago. He'd had 2 years to think about it, to build a framework around it, and the framework changed what the name meant. It wasn't a monster from a story anymore. It was a problem with specific parameters that would require a specific response. He's been sending things, Harry said. To test where I am. What I can do. Probably, Makima said. Or someone acting on his behalf. So he already knows what I can do. After today. He knows something, she said. He may not know what to make of it yet. Harry looked at the space where the fiend had been. He looked at it the way he looked at incident files, extracting information from the event, filing it, assessing implications. What do we do? He said. Nothing, Makima said. Yet. Tonight we secure the building. Tomorrow we discuss what comes next. She turned from the wall. But first, she looked at him with an expression that wasn't warm exactly but had warmth as a component of something more complex. You did well today. Harry looked at her. I know, he said. Not arrogantly. With the same factual precision he applied to everything. He'd assessed what he'd done and he'd assessed whether it was good work, and it had been, and he saw no reason to perform false modesty about it. Kishibe made another noise. This one was closer to a laugh. The securing of the building took 3 hours and involved Makima making 2 phone calls that she stepped outside to make, and Kishibe rebuilding the front wall with the particular competence of a man who had repaired field-damaged structures enough times that he'd stopped finding it remarkable. Harry helped without being asked. handing materials, holding things level, doing the physical work that needed smaller hands in the gaps without commentary. When it was done, they sat in the kitchen and ate the rice and something that Kishib made because it was his night and his philosophy that food made from scratch was honest regardless of how it tasted. "This tastes like it wanted to be something else," Harry said. "Eat it," Kishib said. "I'm eating it." They ate. Outside the secured windows, Southwark continued in its canal-smelling, rain-considering way, and for a while it was just the three of them in a kitchen with a repaired wall and bad rice and adequate company. "The fear devil," Harry said, after a while. "Did you know they could be scared?" Kishib considered. "No," he said. "Not from any record I've read." "They can." Harry was turning his spoon in his bowl with the abstract focus of someone whose brain was still working on a problem while their body did something else. If something can be fear, then presumably it can also experience fear. The same way something that is fire can be burned by something hotter. He looked up. "I want to understand what scared it." "Preferably from a safe distance," Kishib said. "Yes," Harry agreed, with the tone of someone saying obviously without wanting to be rude about it. "What did it feel like?" Makima said. "When you held the fiend." "The effort of it." "Describe the sensation." Harry thought. This was an exercise she'd been doing since the beginning, extracting precise subjective descriptions of magical experience because she told him early on that the interior data was as important as the observable data. "Like holding a door closed against a flood," he said. "But the flood was also trying to understand the concept of the door. Every moment I held it, it was learning the shape of what was stopping it." He paused. "If it had been in there longer, if it had more experience with being opposed, I think it could have pushed through." "That's exactly right," Makima said, and the quality of approval in her voice was different from the professional acknowledgement she'd given him earlier. This was something more specific, the look of someone who has explained something to many people and very rarely had it understood. The longer a devil inhabits a host, the more it develops adaptive responses to resistance. Your window on that specific class of fiend was already narrowing. "Then we need to prevent them from having that time," Harry said. "Early intervention. Which requires knowing they're active. Which requires better monitoring." He looked at her. "The passive sensors that logged me. Can those be calibrated for fiend signatures specifically?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "It would take recalibration across the network and a defined signature baseline." She paused. "Where did you learn about the passive sensor network?" "The book you gave me," he said. Chapter 14. You mentioned the calibration process in a margin note about theoretical expansion of the monitoring range. He tilted his head. "Was that deliberate?" Makima looked at him. "Go to bed," she said. He went, taking his bowl to the sink first, rinsing it, stacking it, then walking upstairs with the even unhurried tread that was just his way of existing in space. They heard his door close. Kishib looked at Makima. "Chapter 14, he said. "I write my margin notes carefully," she said. "You left him a breadcrumb about the sensor network." "I left him an interesting problem," she said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She stood and picked up her own bowl. "He needed to start thinking at an operational level," she said. "He thinks best when he thinks he's discovering something rather than being taught it." She rinsed her bowl. "The sensor network question is 3 years away from being practically relevant. But the habit of thinking about it, that's immediately relevant." Kishib sat with his terrible rice and thought about this for a moment. "You knew he'd found the file," he said. "The Dumbledore file." "Yes." "For how long?" "About 4 months." "And he didn't ask about it," she said. "When he was ready to ask, he would ask. Tonight was the right moment." She dried her hands on a kitchen towel. "He assessed the situation correctly. He found it, he sat with it, he waited until he understood enough to have a productive conversation about it. That's exactly the right response. Most children would have been upset, Kishaib said. Finding out someone was hiding things about them. He's not most children. No, Kishaib said. He's not. He ate the rest of his bad rice. Upstairs he could hear, after a moment, the soft sound of Harry at his desk, the chair, and then silence, and then the very faint sound of pages turning. The boy read at night when he was processing something. Kishaib had learned this the way you learned all things about Harry, by paying attention and then sitting with what you noticed. What happens when Dumbledore stops being patient? Kishaib said. Makima was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the repaired wall, the new paint smell of it still in the air. He sends something larger, she said. Or he comes himself. And when he comes himself? She turned from the wall and looked at Kishaib with her level golden eyes. Then, she said, we have a conversation. Autumn arrived the way it always did in London, sideways, with rain as its primary argument, and Harry turned it into a study in observation. He walked the neighborhood for the first time that September, finally given the independent range Makima had promised him contingent on his own readiness, and he moved through Southwark with the focused attention of someone mapping not just space but pattern. He came home one afternoon having made 3 notes on a piece of paper that he brought to Makima in her office without preamble. She looked at the paper. The 3 notes read, unusual foot traffic on canal path, same 3 figures, rotating schedule. Second floor window of building across the water, glass is cleaner than the rest. Someone's been watching from there. The newsagent on Borough High Street recognized my description before I gave it, he knew who I was. Makima read the notes. She looked up at him. How long, she said. The figures on the canal, at least 2 weeks, I think, but I only started paying attention to them 3 days ago. The window, I noticed the light reflection yesterday. The newsagent, Harry paused, and for a moment something crossed his face that was more complex than the usual assessment. He looked at my scar, he said. Before he looked at my face. Makima set the paper down. She looked at him with the full quality of her attention, and even Harry, who did not flinch from it, went slightly still under the weight of it. You understand what that means, she said. He knows what I look like, Harry said. From before. From whatever I am in the wizarding world. He held her gaze. I think it's time you told me everything in that file. She was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her desk drawer, took out a thicker file than the one he'd found on the shelf, and placed it on the desk in front of him. He sat down and opened it. He read for a long time without speaking. Makima stayed at her desk and worked. The office was quiet except for the canal and the rain and the sound of Harry reading about the boy who lived, about prophecies and dark lords and a wizarding world that had been waiting for him for 8 years. He read about what Dumbledore had planned for him, the careful architecture of isolation and ignorance and managed suffering, the instrument being shaped by a hand that had decided it was kinder not to explain to the instrument what it was being shaped for. When he finished he closed the file and put it back on the desk. He was quiet for a long moment. He was going to let me stay in that cupboard, Harry said. Until it was useful for me to leave. Yes, Makima said. Because a boy who grows up powerless and grateful is easier to aim. Yes. Harry looked at the file. His face was the face it always was, even, controlled, that surface nothing gave through. But underneath it something was moving, something large and contained, and Kishaib, who had come to stand in the doorway at some point during the reading, watched the boy the way you watch weather forming. I'm not angry, Harry said. I know, Makima said. He paused, looking for the right word with his usual precision. I'm resolute, he said. About not being what he planned for. You've been resolute about that since you were 6, she said. He looked at her. Something passed between them that Kishaib couldn't fully read, not warmth exactly, not a transaction, something more like mutual recognition. 2 people who had, for different reasons and from entirely different starting points, arrived at the same understanding about what it meant to decide what you were going to be. What do I do about the people watching the building? Harry asked. Nothing yet, she said. Let them watch. Let them report back, she said. What they'll report is a boy in a safe house in Southwark. Unremarkable. Contained. She looked at him. Let Dumbledore think he knows what he's dealing with. Harry nodded slowly. The same nod he gave when he'd understood something and was already building on it. And when Hogwarts comes, he said. It will come in 2 years, she said. We'll be ready. He stood. Picked up his paper with its 3 notes. I'll add the canal figures to the map I've been keeping, he said. Good. He walked to the door, paused. Makima, he said. She looked up. The fiend yesterday, he said. The one I dissolved. The person whose body it was. He didn't look away from her. Does anyone know what happens to the person when a devil takes a corpse that long? Where they go? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. We don't know. He nodded once, taking that into his filing system, adding it to the pile of things he was still working out how to carry. Okay, he said. And he left. Kishibe stood in the doorway until the sound of Harry's footsteps reached the top floor and his door clicked shut, and then he looked at Makima. Resolute, he said. Yes, she said. He's 8. He's always been older than 8, she said. Kishibe thought about this. He thought about the rocks on the windowsill and the map drawn from memory on the first night and the 3 notes on the piece of paper that an 8-year-old had brought to a control devil's office because he'd noticed something was wrong and wanted to fix it. We should have a proper conversation about Dumbledore, he said. We will, she said. Soon. She looked back at her work. Before it becomes necessary, she said. Which is different from soon. He went back to the kitchen and made tea that was better than his coffee and sat at the table and listened to the canal and the rain and the building being quiet in the way it was when Harry was upstairs reading and processing and growing into whatever enormous thing he was going to be. Through the repaired wall, the street outside was ordinary. Wet. London. A canal path with 3 figures on rotation who thought they were invisible. Kishibe drank his tea. Somewhere in Scotland, an old man with a quill was writing on information that was 2 years out of date, making plans around a boy he hadn't met, certain he understood exactly what had been built in a cupboard in Surrey. He was wrong about almost everything. He just didn't know it yet. Chapter 4. The world opens. Diagon Alley smelled like possibility and old paper and something underneath both of those that Harry couldn't name, something older than the buildings, older than the cobblestones, a pressure in the air that his sensors had been trained to read for 3 years and which here was just ambient, saturating everything, the way salt saturates sea air. He stood at the entrance from the leaky cauldron and took it in. He was 10 years old and he had not looked like 10 for at least a year. Not physically, he was still slight, still on the shorter side, still wearing the dark, functional clothes that Makima favored for field-adjacent situations, which was apparently all situations. But there was something in the way he stood, the way his eyes moved through a new space, methodical, unhurried, reading exit points and energy signatures and the behavioral patterns of the crowd simultaneously, that made adults glance at him twice without being able to explain why. Makima stood beside him. Kishibe was 2 steps behind them, hands in his pockets, already making the face he made in situations that he found professionally distasteful. Diagon Alley was a lot of things. Subtle wasn't one of them. The letter specified a list, Makima said. She produced a piece of parchment, cream-colored, sealed with wax, the Hogwarts crest rendered in green, and held it without unfolding it. She'd received it 4 days ago and had read it once and then set it aside to be addressed at her convenience, which was today. Wand, robes, books, cauldron, owl or cat or toad. She looked at the alley. We'll start with the wand. We start with information, Harry said. She glanced at him. We don't know this place, he said. We know it exists, we know its general function, we know approximately where things are from the file descriptions. But we haven't been here. I want to walk it first. Makima considered this for exactly the length of time it took her to confirm that he was correct. 15 minutes, she said. They walked. Harry moved through Diagon Alley the way he moved through Southwark, not like a tourist, not like someone who was impressed by things, but like someone who was building a working model of a space in real time and needed accurate data for it. He noted the layout, the way the alley curved, the secondary passages, the density of magical energy and how it changed near different shops. He noted the people, the wizards and witches who moved with the casual comfort of people in their natural environment, who looked at him without recognition because here he was just another dark-haired boy and the lightning bolt scar was hidden under his fringe, which was long enough for the purpose. He noted the staring. Not at him. At Makima. It was different from regular staring. Wizards who passed her paused, or slowed, or went slightly rigid, or crossed to the other side of the alley without seeming to intend to. Like animals near something that their biology recognized before their brain did. She moved through the alley with her usual perfect calm and the crowd parted around her without touching her, and Harry watched this happen and filed it and said nothing. They can feel you, he said, after a while. Yes, she said. They don't know what you are, he said. But something in them does. Magic is old, she said. Old enough to remember what I am. She glanced sideways at him. Does it concern you? No, he said. He had the complete honesty about this that he had about most things. It didn't concern him, not because he'd thought through whether it should and decided it shouldn't, but because she was Makima and he'd been operating in her proximity for 4 years and whatever she was, she'd never once directed any of it at him as a threat. He was aware that this comfort was notable. He was also aware that he'd earned the access to it. Kishibe, from behind them, made a quiet sound that could have meant several things. Ollivander's was narrow and deep and smelled of wood shavings and something resinous that Harry couldn't immediately identify. The shelves went up beyond the range of the light, stacked with long thin boxes, and behind the counter an old man appeared from somewhere between the shelves like a person who had been waiting a very long time for an appointment he wasn't sure he wanted to keep. He looked at Harry. Then his eyes moved to Makima. He went very still. Good afternoon, he said. His voice was careful. The voice of a man who had decided, in the space of a single breath, to be as inoffensive as possible. I am, Garrick Ollivander, Makima said pleasantly. I know. The boy needs a wand. Yes, Ollivander said. He did not look away from her. Yes, of course. He cleared his throat and managed, with visible effort, to redirect his gaze to Harry. Your wand arm, please. Harry raised his right arm. Ollivander measured him with a tape measure that operated without hands, moving on its own in a way that Harry tracked with peripheral attention while keeping his eyes on the wandmaker's face. The man was frightened and managing it professionally, and there was something else in his expression, recognition, Harry thought, the specific quality of someone looking at a face they'd been expecting. You know who I am, Harry said. Ollivander blinked. Every wand I've sold to every witch and wizard who, you knew the moment I walked in, Harry said. Not confrontationally, just stating what he'd observed. Is it the scar? A pause. And the eyes, Ollivander said, very quietly. Your mother had extraordinary eyes. Harry was still for a moment. What was her wand? Ollivander seemed to settle slightly, the question put him on familiar ground, the language he knew. Willow. 10 1/4 inches. Swishy, excellent for charms work. Lovely wand. He moved to the shelves. Now. Let us find yours. What followed was the specific chaos of Ollivander's method, which Harry found genuinely interesting once he understood the principle behind it. The wand maker wasn't measuring him with the tape measure, or not only with it. He was reading something subtler, the same way Harry reads states and fields. Each wand he tried told both of them something, the ones that did nothing as informative as the ones that sparked. 5 wands in, Harry stopped the process. The energy in here, he said to Ollivander, who had a sixth box in his hands, is more concentrated at that end of the room. He pointed toward the far left corner of the shop. Higher up. Third shelf from the top, I think. Ollivander turned and looked at him with an expression that had moved past professional wariness into something like genuine surprise. That section is, he hesitated. Those are unusual wands. Cores that don't cooperate with most practitioners. I rarely suggest them. I'm not most practitioners, Harry said. Kishibe, leaning against the doorframe, made that sound again. This time it was definitely a suppressed laugh. Ollivander went to the left corner. He climbed the short ladder, disappeared into the shelves, and came back down with a single box, narrower than the others, the wood of it darker, slightly warped at one corner as though it had been stored in conditions not designed for it. He set it on the counter. He looked at Harry. He didn't open it. Holly and phoenix feather, he said. 11 inches. Pliable. He paused. I made this wand 29 years ago. I was saving it. He glanced, briefly and helplessly, at Makima. I didn't know I was saving it for this specific circumstance, but he stopped. Open it, Harry said. Ollivander opened the box. Harry took the wand. The rush of it was immediate and complete, not the physical warmth he'd been taught to produce through intention but something that was already there waiting, a resonance between the thing in his chest and the thing in his hand, a conjunction of states. He felt it the way he felt the knot resolving, except from the inside rather than looking at it from outside. Sparks came from the tip, not scattered, not explosive, but a clean coherent stream of gold and white that lit the whole shop and made Ollivander step back involuntarily and made Kishibe straighten up in the doorway and made Harry look at his own hand with the specific focus of someone cataloging a new piece of information. Right, Ollivander said. He was breathing slightly faster. Yes. He looked at Harry with an expression that was half professional and half something more unguarded. Curious. Very curious. What is? Harry asked, still looking at the wand. The phoenix whose tail feather is in that wand, Ollivander said, gave only one other feather. One other wand. He paused. It was the wand that gave you that scar. Harry looked up. He held the wand maker's gaze for a moment, then looked at Makima. She was looking at him with that expression that wasn't warm but had warmth as a component, the look of someone watching something arrive that they've been waiting for. She already knew, he realized. She'd probably known before they walked in. Brothers, Harry said. In a sense, Ollivander said. Harry looked at the wand again. He turned it in his hand, feeling the resonance of it, and then he lowered it to his side and the spark stopped and the shop went back to its normal dim. Thank you, he said. He paid 7 galleons from the money Makima had changed at Gringotts while Harry was mapping the alley. They walked out into Diagon Alley and Harry held his wand and said nothing for a moment while the alley moved around them. You knew about the connection, he said to Makima. I suspected, she said. Is that why you didn't tell me before we came in? You wouldn't have chosen differently, she said. And I wanted you to encounter it without context. Your first response to a thing, before you've had time to build a framework around it, is often the most accurate data you produce. He thought about this. What was my first response? You asked what her wand was, Makima said. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said softly. Then he tucked the wand into his jacket and moved toward the next thing on the list, and Kishibe fell in beside him and neither of them mentioned the quality of the silence he was carrying. Madame Malkin's robes took 20 minutes and very little of Harry's attention. He stood on the fitting platform and let the seamstress do her work and occupied himself with the 2 other people being fitted, a girl about his age, brown bushy hair, reading a spellwork textbook while being fitted and moving her lips slightly with the difficult passages, and a pale-haired boy who was trying to engage Harry in conversation with the specific energy of someone used to conversations being conducted on his terms. Hogwarts, first year, the pale boy said. Me too. Do you know which house you'll be in? I know I'll be Slytherin, all my family has been. He said this with a casual certainty that was performing casualness. What's your surname? Potter, Harry said. The boy's eyes went to his fringe, involuntarily, then up to his face. Something recalibrated behind his expression, not shock, he'd recovered too fast for it to be shock, but a rapid reassessment. I'm Draco Malfoy. The name was in the files. Harry had read the files. I know who the Malfoys are, Harry said. Draco blinked. Most people, apparently, didn't know who the Malfoys were unless they'd been told. Then you'll know, that your father was a Death Eater who claimed coercion, Harry said, pleasantly, as though discussing the weather. That your family's social position post-war has required significant political management. That your mother is considerably more capable than your father and is the reason the Malfoy name survived the Ministry's post-war audit. He looked at Draco with the same level attention he gave everything. I know quite a lot about the Malfoys, actually. Draco stared at him. The girl with the bushy hair had looked up from her textbook. How do you know all that? Draco said. His voice had lost the performing casualness quality and found something more genuine, wariness, and underneath it, the particular attentiveness of someone who has just encountered a situation they haven't been briefed on. I read, Harry said. Draco was quiet for a moment, and in that moment Harry was reading him the way he read everything, the particular quality of the silence, the way his jaw had set, the flicker of calculation in his grey eyes. He was smart, Harry noted. Smarter than he'd been presenting. The casual air performance was deliberate, and he dropped it the moment it stopped being useful, which meant he knew when to stop performing. That was interesting. The Ministry audit is not public record, Draco said carefully. No, Harry agreed. So how, Malfoy, Harry said, I've been trained by people who have access to things the Ministry doesn't know it's sharing. He stepped down from the fitting platform, his robes pinned and ready for alteration. I'm not an enemy. I'm also not an easy ally. Just so you know where you stand. He paid for the robes and walked out, and behind him he could feel Draco Malfoy standing on his fitting platform working through what had just happened with a focus that suggested he was going to be thinking about it for a while. Kishibe was waiting outside, leaning against the shop front, eating a pasty from a paper bag. You could have been less, he gestured vaguely. Honest? Harry said. I was going to say surgical. I wanted him to know early, Harry said. So he can decide what he wants to do about it before we're in the same school. He paused. He's smarter than he looks. Most people are, Kishibe said, and offered him the other half of the pasty. Flourish and Blots was enormous and Harry could have stayed inside it for the rest of the day. He didn't, because Makima had a timeline, but he moved through it with the focused attention of someone cataloging a significant resource. He bought everything on the school list and then moved through the other shelves with his eyes and added 4 more books that weren't on the list and weren't standard school reading: Advanced Magical Theory, a comprehensive text on the history of magical law, a slim book on pre-classical European magical traditions, and something called The Architecture of Intention that was shelved in the back between 2 dusty books about divination and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The shopkeeper looked at the pile. The last one, he said, pointing at The Architecture of Intention. That's a restricted text. Not officially, but, do you know what it covers? The relationship between caster intent and magical outcome in high-energy applications, Harry said. Chapter 3 covers the theoretical basis for what some older texts call state magic. I've been working with the practice for 3 years and I've never had a theoretical framework for it. He looked at the shopkeeper. I'd like it, please. The shopkeeper looked at Harry, and then at Makima standing 2 steps back, and apparently concluded that this was not a battle worth having. He added it to the pile. The pile came to 11 books, 3 of which were advanced Newt-level texts that Harry would not technically be taught for 7 more years. He carried them out of the shop without apparent effort, which was partly because he'd been doing physical training since he was 7. On the street, Hermione Granger ran into him. Not metaphorically, she came out of flourish and blots at a run because she'd forgotten something inside and collided with him at the door, and he caught her by the arm before she could go down and she straightened up red-faced with a stack of her own books clutched to her chest. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "I wasn't watching, I went back for a history of magic and I forgot I'd already put it in my bag and she stopped. Looked at the stack in his arms. Her eyes went to the architecture of intention and stayed there. Where did you find that?" "I've been looking for that for weeks, the shopkeeper said they didn't have it, it was in the back," Harry said. "Between two divination texts." "Of course it was, nobody looks there," she said, with the tone of someone deeply aggrieved by the organizational decisions of other people. She looked at him. "You know what it covers?" "State magic theory." "Yes." "Have you read it?" "Not yet. I've been working with the practice." Her eyes went wide in the specific way of someone who has just heard something very interesting. "You've been practicing state magic? Without the theory?" "That's how." "The empirical approach to high-energy magical work without a theoretical framework is," she stopped. Reconsidered. "Actually, what were your results?" Harry looked at her for a moment. She was vibrating very slightly with the contained energy of someone who was always moving faster than the current situation required. Her eyes were sharp, her attention total, and she was talking to him like he was a colleague rather than a stranger she'd just run into on the street, which he found immediately preferable to most social interactions. "Good results," he said. "Better once I have the framework, presumably." "I would think so," she said, with emphatic authority. The theory in Chapter 3 explains why the initial intention setting is so energy-intensive. Without understanding the structural reason for the cost you can't work toward reducing it. There's a whole section on efficiency optimization. She looked at the book again with the expression of someone genuinely pained to be on the wrong side of a transaction. "I suppose you found it first." "I'll lend it to you when I'm done," Harry said. She looked at him. "You don't know me." "You clearly know what you're talking about," he said, "and you wanted the book for the right reasons. That's sufficient." He adjusted the stack under his arm. "Harry Potter." "Hermione Granger." She said it reflexively, then stopped, and her eyes went to his fringe, and then to his face, and then she had the decency to look slightly flustered rather than staring. "Oh," she said. "Oh, yes," he said. "I've read about you," she said. "In modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century." "What did they say?" "That you defeated you-know-who as a baby," she said, "and that you were living quietly with your Muggle relatives." She glanced at Makima, who was standing behind Harry with the relaxed posture of someone who found this interaction acceptable and was prepared to let it run. "Which appears to be somewhat inaccurate." "Substantially inaccurate," Harry said. Hermione looked at Makima again, with the careful attention of someone who was reading a situation and mostly correctly. "You've been trained," she said to Harry. "Not a question." "Yes." She stopped herself, clearly deciding that this was not the right moment for that question. She was, Harry noted, good at deciding which questions were for now and which were for later. That was a rarer skill than most people understood. "Well," she said. "I suppose I'll see you at Hogwarts." "Yes," he said. "You will." She looked at him for another moment, with that sharp, total attention, and then she nodded once, a deliberate, decided nod, the kind that meant "I have catalogued this and will return to it," and walked back into flourish and blots with her stack of books. Kishibe appeared at Harry's elbow. "Friend," he said. "I think so," Harry said. "Eventually." The owl came 3 weeks later. Not Hedwig, that had been the name of the owl in the letter, the one the school supplied, and Harry had bought her at Elop's Owl Emporium with something that was not quite affection but was definitely interest. She was white and enormous and looked at him with amber eyes that he found approximately as communicative as most people's faces. The owl that came 3 weeks after Diagon Alley was not Hedwig. It was a large, imperious bird, dark, that landed on his windowsill at dawn and extended its leg with the specific tension of a bird that was carrying something important and knew it. Harry untied the letter without touching the bird. He read it standing at the window in the early grey London light, Hedwig watching from her perch in the corner. Then he went downstairs. Makima was already awake, which he'd expected. She was in the kitchen with her tea and her files, and she looked up when he came in and set the letter on the table between them. She read it. Her expression didn't change. "He wants to meet," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "He's framed it as an invitation," Harry said. "But the language underneath is, a summons," she said. "Correct." The letter was written in the elegant, unhurried script of someone who was used to being heard. "Dear Harry," it began, "I understand you have been in excellent hands these past 4 years, though I confess I have been remiss in not making contact sooner. There are things you deserve to know, that I should have told you long ago, about your parents, about your destiny, about the extraordinary responsibility that comes with being who you are." It went on. It was warm. It was concerned. It expressed, with the practiced craft of someone who had been writing letters to people who needed to trust him for most of a century, profound and genuine interest in Harry's well-being. It was also, in every meaningful structural sense, an attempt to establish authority and access that hadn't been offered. "No," Harry said. Makima looked at him. "Not yet," he clarified. "Not on his terms. When I meet Dumbledore it's because I chose the moment and the context. Not because he wrote me a letter in September. He sat down. He waited 4 years to write it. He can wait until I'm ready." Kishibe came downstairs at that moment, in the clothes he'd apparently slept in, carrying the instinctive coffee cup of a man who navigated mornings on autopilot. He saw the letter on the table. He picked it up, read it. Set it down. "He knows you're in London," Kishibe said. "Yes," Makima said. "He knows about the training. He suspects." "He suspects, so he's being very polite," Kishibe said. He sat down. He looked at Harry. "What do you want to do?" Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, London was making its early morning sounds, buses, the canal, gulls from the Thames. The letter sat on the table and was very still. "I want to go to Hogwarts and do this on my own terms," Harry said. "I want to meet him in a context where he doesn't control the variables." He looked at Makima. "He thinks he's been watching me for 4 years. He thinks he knows what I am. He thinks you're an asset he's lost temporary access to," Makima said. "Right," Harry said. "So let him think that." She held his gaze. Something settled between them, not agreement exactly, more like alignment, two people whose separate assessments had arrived at the same point from different directions. "You know there's a version of this," Kishibe said, "where you walk into that school and just, I don't know, learn things. Make friends. Have a normal year." Harry looked at him. "I know," Kishibe said. "Never mind. I'm going to make friends," Harry said. "I'm going to learn things. I'm genuinely looking forward to it." He picked up the letter, folded it, set it aside. "I'm also going to pay attention to what's actually going on in that castle. Because something is." He looked at Makima. "The energy readings from the Scottish Highlands in the divisional logs. The spike in the last 18 months. Noted," she said. "Something is there," he said. "Something that isn't just a school." "Yes," she said. "Does it connect to Voldemort?" "Very likely. Then it connects to me." She looked at him with her level golden eyes. "When you walk into Hogwarts," she said, "you walk in as yourself. Not as anyone's weapon. Not as anyone's prophecy." A pause, deliberate. "You walk in as someone who knows more than they expect and can do more than they've planned for. And you let the situation develop until you understand it well enough to address it. And then? Harry said. Then, she said, you address it. He nodded. He poured himself tea. He'd been drinking tea since he was about 8, another thing he'd picked up from the kitchen rhythms of the house, and sat back and looked at the canal through the window. I wrote back to Hermione Granger, he said. 2 weeks ago. She replied. She's read the Theory and Charms books for first year already and has detailed notes. A pause. She found an error in the textbook's explanation of the Wingardium Leviosa principle. She's correct about it. Kishib made his almost laugh sound. She sounds useful, Makima said. She's not a resource, Harry said, mildly. I know, Makima said, and her voice had something in it that was almost, not quite, amusement. She's going to be my friend, he said. Because I like her. Not because she's useful. The two aren't mutually exclusive, Makima said. I know, Harry said. But the order matters. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at her files, which was her way of ending a conversation she'd found satisfactory. Harry drank his tea and Kishib ate cereal directly from the box, which was his breakfast philosophy when he hadn't been awake long enough to make decisions, and outside the canal reflected the October light and the letter sat folded on the table. 2 weeks later, Harry wrote to Dumbledore. Dear Professor Dumbledore, he wrote, thank you for your letter. I look forward to meeting you when I arrive at Hogwarts. I expect we'll have a great deal to discuss. Regards, Harry Potter. 11 words of substance in a reply to 400. He sent it with Hedwig, who carried it with the air of a bird who found the correspondence beneath her dignity but was willing to be professional about it. He watched her go from his window and then turned back to his desk where the architecture of intention was open to chapter 3 and his notes were organized in the precise system he'd developed, things confirmed, things theoretical, things still open, and he sat down and got back to work. He had 1 month before Hogwarts. He intended to use every hour of it. The night before the Hogwarts Express, Kishib sat on the roof with him. They'd been on the roof together before, for training, for the rope work, for the nights when the house felt small and the sky over London felt like the right amount of large. This was different, neither of them had suggested it, they just both ended up there, the way things happened in the house sometimes, through an unspoken mutual understanding of what was needed. Southwark was below them. The canal, the bridge, the distant suggestion of the Thames. London at night, which was never dark. I'm going to say something, Kishib said, and you're going to let me say it without it turning into a tactical discussion. Harry looked at him. All right. You're 10 years old, Kishib said. And you've worked harder than any person I've known in 30 years of this job. And you are, he stopped. Tried again. You're going to walk into that school and it's going to be full of children who don't know what a devil is and whose biggest concern is the Quidditch House Cup and who've never had to think about any of the things you've had to think about. He looked at the canal. You're allowed to enjoy some of that. Whatever normal looks like in there, you're allowed to have pieces of it. You don't have to be what we've made you every minute of every day. Harry was quiet. I know, he said. Do you? Kishib, Harry said, with the patient tone of someone who was about to be more honest than the conversation required. I'm not going to stop being what I am because I'm in a school. But I'm also not only what I am. He paused. I'm going to find the thing that's wrong in that castle and I'm going to understand it and address it if it needs addressing. I'm also going to learn magic from actual teachers for the first time in my life, and find out whether Hermione's notes on Chapter 4 are as good as her notes on Chapter 3, and figure out what Quidditch is like from the inside rather than the theoretical. He looked at Kishib. I know how to be a person, Kishib. You taught me. Kishib looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached over and put his hand on the back of Harry's neck briefly, the way he had twice before in 4 years, once after the fiend, once after a training session that had gone wrong and left Harry frustrated with himself past the point of his usual composure. The gesture meant something that neither of them had ever put into words, because putting it into words would have required admitting something about what the last 4 years had been, and they were both people who operated better in the territory of the understood than the territory of the said. Harry didn't tense up. He leaned into it, slightly, for a moment. Right, Kishib said. Regularly. Twice a week, Harry said. And call if something goes badly wrong. Yes. Or if you just want to. Harry looked at him sideways. Or if I just want to, he confirmed, and the thing that wasn't quite a smile was on his face. They sat on the roof for a while longer. Below them Southwark went about its business. Above them London's light made the sky pale orange, and the canal moved in its slow canal way, and the house that had been home for 4 years sat quiet and full of files and bad coffee and 3 rocks on a windowsill that would still be there when he came back. Makima was in her office. She didn't come up. But Harry, going down the stairs to bed, passed her office door, slightly open, the light on, and stopped. "I'll be careful," he said, to the gap in the door. A pause. "I know you will," she said. He went to bed. He slept immediately, the sleep of someone who had done everything they could do to prepare and had no anxiety left for the insomnia of the uncertain. In the morning, King's Cross. Platform 9 3/4. The Hogwarts Express in its impossible scarlet. And Harry Potter, 10 years old, with a wand of holly and phoenix feather and 4 years of training and 3 rocks in his pocket, walked through a solid wall and into whatever came next. Chapter 5. Hogwarts. The Hogwarts Express was loud in the specific way of a thing that had been doing the same journey for 60 years and had stopped being impressed by itself. Steam, noise, the smell of something being fried in the food trolley 3 carriages back, and the general cacophony of several hundred children who hadn't seen each other in 3 months colliding at once in a confined moving space. Harry found a compartment near the middle of the train, stowed his trunk, settled Hedwig's cage on the overhead rack, and sat by the window. He watched the platform empty as the train pulled out of King's Cross, the crowd thinning, the red brick disappearing, London giving way to suburbs and then to countryside, and he was quiet inside in the way he was always quiet inside, the way that wasn't emptiness but readiness. Hermione found him 20 minutes out of London. She slid the compartment door open with the expression of someone who had already checked 4 other compartments and was relieved not to have to check a 5th, and she had more books than could reasonably be explained by a single trunk. "I wasn't sure you'd be on the train," she said. "I thought you might arrive differently." "Why would I arrive differently?" Harry said. "Because you," she gestured in a way that indicated the general concept of his situation without being specific about it. "Because of everything." She sat down across from him. She had advanced transfiguration theory open before the train had fully adjusted to its cruising speed. "I'm a first year," Harry said. "I arrive on the train." She glanced up. "You've read the Newt Transfiguration text," she said. "I know because the copy I got from Flourish and Blots had your annotations in the margin from when you borrowed it." "I bought my own copy," he said. "I annotated yours when I returned it because you'd made an error in your notes on page 47 and I thought you'd want to know." She stared at him. Then she opened the book to page 47, read his margin note, read her own note beside it, and made a sound of pure professional indignation. "I was working from the first edition source text," she said. "The third edition revised that theorem completely, which the author should have noted in the bibliography." "He should have," Harry agreed. "I've been building my understanding of elemental state theory on a flawed foundation for 3 months." "The foundation isn't flawed," Harry said. "Just the specific application in that one theorem. Your notes in chapters 1 through 3 are entirely correct." She stopped, recalibrated, and the indignation modulated into something more like acute frustration at a specific problem, which was easier to deal with. "I'll have to revise," she said. "I know. You have time before we cover it in class." She looked at him. "You already know when we cover it in class. The curriculum is in the Hogwarts, a history appendix." Cross-referenced against the standard book list, you can map most of the first-year syllabus. He paused. I made a chart. Hermione looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then she said, show me the chart. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. She took it, unfolded it, and read it with the focus of someone trying to find an error and being disappointed not to find one. You've marked potions as low priority, she said. The first-year potions curriculum is largely procedural, he said. Careful execution, correct ingredients, standard methodology. There's no theoretical challenge until third year at the earliest. Professor Snape is supposed to be extraordinary. At potions, yes. His classroom pedagogy is reportedly another matter. He took the chart back. I'm not dismissing the subject. I'm allocating attention proportionally. The compartment door opened. Neville Longbottom stood in the doorway with the specific expression of someone who had been separated from his toad and was trying not to be visibly panicked about it. He was round-faced and earnest, and there was something in his eyes, not stupidity. Harry had noted quickly that people consistently misread Neville. It was anxiety, thick and habitual, that made him seem less present than he was. Sorry, Neville said. I'm looking for, have you seen a toad? Trevor. He got away from me at King's Cross and I think he might have gotten on the train and, he's in this carriage, Harry said. 3 compartments back, under the seat on the left side. I saw him when I boarded. Neville blinked. How did you? I noticed him, Harry said. Come in and sit down if you want. We can get him after. Neville came in, slightly dazed, and sat. He looked at Harry. At the scar, briefly, then away. He had better manners about it than most people had managed so far. I'm Neville, he said. Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter, Harry said. Hermione Granger. Hermione looked up from her own notes long enough to nod. Neville's expression shifted again, not starstruck exactly, more the expression of someone reassessing a situation they thought they understood. Both names were known ones in the wizarding world, for different reasons, and here they both were in the same train compartment. The Longbottoms, Harry said. Neville looked at him, wariness visible under the politeness. Yes. Your parents were Aurors, Harry said. They're at St. Mungo's. They were tortured into insanity during the war. He said this without cruelty and without softening it into something smaller than it was. The people who did it are in Azkaban. Bellatrix Lestrange, Rodolphus and Rabaston Lestrange, Bartemius Crouch Jr. Neville's face had gone completely still. Not the controlled stillness that was Harry's baseline, but the stillness of someone who was deciding whether to break or hold. Most people don't say it like that, Neville said. His voice was quiet and careful. Most people dance around it, Harry said. I thought you might prefer someone who didn't. A pause. Something in Neville's jaw shifted. Yeah, he said. Actually. Yes. He looked at Harry with a new quality of attention. How do you know all of that? I've read extensively, Harry said. About my family? About everything relevant to the period 1970 to 1991. He held Neville's gaze. Your parents were some of the most effective Aurors working during the war. That's in the record. The people who did what they did to them were afraid of them. A pause. That's also in the record. Neville was quiet. He was looking at Harry in the way people occasionally did when they'd been carrying something for a long time and encountered, unexpectedly, someone who could see the shape of what they were carrying. Not relief, not yet, something more fragile than that. Right, Neville said. Softly. Okay. The train moved through open country, green and gray in the October light, and they sat with this for a moment. Then Hermione said, without looking up from her books, we should probably get Trevor before he migrates further down the train. They got Trevor. He was exactly where Harry had said. The sorting was what it was. Harry stood in the line of first years and watched the great hall with the same attention he gave to every new space, the 4 tables, the floating candles, the ceiling that reflected the cloudy October night, the faculty table at the front where a row of adults sat with the particular energy of people who had been doing this long enough to find it routine. He found Dumbledore immediately. Half-moon spectacles. Silver beard. An expression of warm, patient attention that was the most practiced thing Harry had seen on a human face since Makima. Different kind of practiced. Makima's was deliberate restraint, this was deliberate projection, the face of someone performing accessibility for strategic reasons. The eyes behind the glasses were intelligent and assessing and not, despite all the warmth in the rest of the expression, the eyes of someone who was relaxed. Dumbledore found him at the same moment. Their eyes met across the great hall. Harry held his gaze for 3 seconds and then turned to watch the sorting hat, as though it was the more interesting of the two things, which he thought was probably accurate. The hat sang its song, which he found more substantively interesting than most of the first years appeared to, the categories it described mapped onto something real, a taxonomy of human cognitive and character tendencies, and the framing of them as distinct rather than overlapping was the ideology of an institution that was significantly older than its current understanding of itself. He noted this. The line moved. Names were called. The hat placed children with varying degrees of deliberation, some immediate, some extended, and the hall responded with cheering that had the texture of performance as much as genuine enthusiasm. Granger, Hermione. The hat barely touched her head. Gryffindor. She walked to the table with her chin up and her books still somehow under her arm. Longbottom, Neville. The hat sat on Neville's head for a long moment. Neville's eyes were closed, his hands folded in his lap with the focused stillness of someone concentrating very hard on something. Then, Gryffindor. The relief on Neville's face when the hat came off was profound and unguarded and lasted about 3 seconds before he reassembled his usual expression. Harry noted it. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the conversational quiet of a pause between names, a specific, pressurized silence, the kind that happens when a room full of people all have the same thought simultaneously. He heard his name move through the hall in a wave of whispers, saw heads turn, felt the weight of several hundred people's attention organize itself around him as he walked to the stool and sat down. He was aware of Dumbledore watching him. He was aware of a dark-eyed man at the faculty table, black robes, black hair, a face that was composed into professional neutrality with the careful effort of someone who found neutrality difficult in this specific moment, whose gaze had the quality of someone reading a text they'd thought they knew and finding unfamiliar passages. Snape, presumably. The hat came down over his eyes and everything went dark. Well, said the hat. Its voice was dry and old and thoughtful. This is unusual. Is it? Harry said. You're 10 years old. Yes. Most 10-year-olds don't feel like this. A pause. You've been trained. Yes. By something considerably older and larger than a school. The hat seemed to be turning him over carefully. Interesting. You have the intellectual appetite for Ravenclaw, considerable. The drive for achievement. But there's something else. You're not seeking knowledge for its own sake, not primarily. You're seeking it because you understand that it's structural, it's the difference between operating at full capacity and not. Harry waited. Slytherin would suit your methods, the hat said. Your strategic thinking. Your ability to assess people without sentiment getting in the way. Your comfort with complexity. I'm aware, Harry said. But you won't go there. No. Why? Because the associations would create unnecessary friction in situations where I need cooperation, Harry said. And because Neville Longbottom is in Gryffindor and I want to be able to keep an eye on him. The hat was quiet for a moment. You came to Hogwarts already knowing who you wanted to be close to, it said. I came to Hogwarts having thought about it, Harry said. Which is different. Gryffindor values bravery, the hat said. Are you brave? I don't know, Harry said. I've never been afraid of anything long enough to find out. The hat made a sound that might have been a laugh. Gryffindor, it announced, to a hall that erupted in the kind of noise that had been building since his name was called. He put the hat back on the stool, walked to the Gryffindor table, and sat down beside Hermione. The noise continued for a moment longer than necessary. He ignored it. Hermione was looking at him. "How long did it take?" she said. "About 40 seconds, he said. "Mine was less than 10. "You're less complicated," he said. She considered whether to be offended by this and decided against it. "What did it say?" "That I'm unusual," Harry said. "Which I knew." At the faculty table, Dumbledore was still watching him. Harry picked up his fork, looked at the food that had materialized on the table, and began to eat, and he let Dumbledore watch. The first week at Hogwarts was, in most respects, exactly what it was supposed to be. The castle was enormous and alive in the way that buildings with significant magical history were alive, responsive, layered, full of the accumulated resonance of centuries of intent and use. Harry moved through it with his standard attention and within 3 days had a working map in his head of the primary routes, the secondary passages, and 6 specific locations where the ambient magical energy was significantly higher than background levels. One of those locations was the 3rd-floor corridor on the right-hand side. He found it on the second day while Hermione was at the library and Neville was at herbology orientation, and Ron Weasley, who had inserted himself into their group with the amiable persistence of someone who didn't read social dynamics particularly carefully but was good-natured enough that this was forgivable, was at breakfast. Harry walked the 3rd-floor corridor because it was on his mental list and the energy reading from it was interesting, and because the locked door at the end of it was the kind of locked door that exists to be understood rather than ignored. He stood in front of it. The energy behind it was different from the general castle energy, deeper, more compressed, with the specific quality of something that had been contained rather than something that naturally resided there. Whatever was behind the door had been put there deliberately and relatively recently, within the last year or so, based on the settling of the containment field. He assessed the lock. Standard wizarding lock with a reinforcement charm. He could open it in about 4 seconds. He put his hand on it, felt the state of the mechanism, and then he stopped. Not because he couldn't. Because he was thinking about Makima's voice saying, "Let the situation develop until you understand it well enough to address it." He didn't have enough context yet. He knew something was here. He knew it had been placed here recently. He knew it connected to the elevated magical energy readings in the Highland area that the division had been monitoring. What he didn't know was why, and the why mattered. He took his hand off the door. He walked back to the Gryffindor common room and made notes. Charms was straightforward. Transfiguration was Professor McGonagall, who was precisely what her file had suggested, rigorous, fair, and operating at a level of personal competence that Harry found genuinely impressive. She turned her desk into a pig on the first day with the clean efficiency of someone for whom the action required no more thought than walking. He watched the internal state transformation, the quality of the shift, and noted 3 things about her method that he hadn't seen in his theoretical reading. He wrote them down. McGonagall noticed. "Mr. Potter," she said, after the rest of the class had left on the second day. He was still at his desk, finishing a notation. He looked up. She was standing with the specific posture of someone who had decided to have a direct conversation and was beginning it in the middle rather than at the beginning. "You performed the match-to-needle transformation on your first attempt," she said. "In 22 years of teaching this class I can count on one hand the number of students who have done that." "The principle isn't difficult," he said. "Identifying the state differential between the 2 objects and deciding on the transition rather than performing it in stages. The difficulty is usually conceptual rather than technical." She looked at him steadily. "Where did you learn that framing?" "I developed it," he said. "Based on about 3 years of practice." "Practice with whom?" He held her gaze. "Private instruction," he said. She was quiet for a moment, reading him with the attention of a very experienced person encountering something they hadn't anticipated. "Your instruction has been comprehensive, she said. Yes. Newt-level theory in first year. Among other things. She looked at him for another moment. Then, I'd like to see what else you can do, she said. Not in class, your classmates are at a different level and I'd rather not create dynamics that are difficult to manage. On Wednesday evenings, if you're available. I'm available, he said. Good. She gathered her papers with the efficiency of someone whose professional life ran on schedule. And Mr. Potter, I want you to know that this school takes the development of every student seriously, regardless of background or circumstance. A pause. I also want you to know that if there are things you've been through that, she stopped. Recalibrated. My office is open, she said simply. Thank you, Professor, he said. She nodded once and left, and Harry sat in the empty Transfiguration classroom for a moment and thought about what it meant that the first adult at Hogwarts to speak to him with complete directness was not Dumbledore. Snape was something else entirely. Potions on Friday morning, and Harry walked into the dungeon classroom with Hermione and Neville and 40 minutes of prior reading on the curriculum content, and he sat at the front because the sight lines were better and because he found the smell of the ingredients genuinely interesting, a dense, complex layering of chemical states that his 3-year study of energy and matter made him want to map. Snape took attendance. Harry Potter, he said, and his voice had a specific quality on the name, not hatred, not yet, something more controlled than that, more deliberate. He looked up from the register. Harry met his gaze. Our new celebrity, Snape said. The class waited. This was a performance for the room, Harry understood, the dungeon, the flat voice, the specific choice to open with social diminishment. He assessed it without reacting to it. Tell me, Potter, Snape said, moving with deliberate unhaste toward the front of the room, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class held its breath with the tension of people watching something they expected to be unpleasant. The draught of living death, Harry said. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The challenge in the preparation is the temperature gradient between the asphodel addition and the wormwood infusion. The margin is about 3 degrees, and getting it wrong by more than that degrades the soporific compound into something closer to a paralytic. Which is a different and significantly less controlled effect. Snape stopped moving. The class was very quiet. Where would you look, Snape said, after a moment, if I told you to find a bezoar? Stomach of a goat, Harry said. Broadly speaking. Though the efficacy varies by species, Persian goats produce the most reliable grade for antidote purposes, which is why the best commercial sources come from the region historically. The active component is the calcium carbonate structure, which binds to most common poisons at a cellular level. Snape looked at him. His expression had not changed. It was the expression of a face that was very practiced at not changing. And, he said, what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Aconitum. Wolfsbane is the common name, monkshood is the regional variant. Both refer to the genus rather than specific species. There are about 250 species in the genus, and the potion's applications vary significantly by species. When a recipe specifies monkshood without further qualification, it's typically referring to Aconitum napellus, which has the highest concentration of aconitine. A pause. Also called aconite. 3 names, same plant. The silence in the dungeon was now a different kind of silence. Snape looked at him for a long moment. It seems, he said, slowly, that fame isn't everything. He turned back to the front of the class, and his voice returned to its normal register. Begin your instructions. 5 points from Gryffindor for Mr. Potter's excess of information. Hermione made a sound of pure outrage beside him. It's fine, Harry said quietly. He took points for you answering correctly, I know. Harry opened his potions kit. It doesn't matter. She stared at him. It absolutely matters, Hermione. He looked at her. He knows I know. That's the part that matters. The points are theater. She looked like she wanted to continue arguing about this, which was fair. She was not wrong. But she read something in his expression that suggested he had a broader assessment of the situation, and she subsided, though with visible effort, and opened her own kit. Across the classroom, Neville had knocked over his first ingredient container, which was going to be a disaster if left. Harry caught it before it fully tipped, wordlessly, without looking. Neville exhaled and mouthed "thank you." By the end of class, Harry's potion was the correct color and viscosity. 3 other students were not. Snape made no comment on Harry's. That, Harry noted, was its own kind of comment. He found the troll. Not the way the books would have had it, not stumbling into a corridor on Halloween night as a consequence of Hermione crying in a bathroom. He found it 2 hours before it was let in, because he'd been mapping the castle's lower corridors during the Thursday evening when everyone else was at the feast, and he'd encountered a presence in the sub-basement passages that had none of the qualities of human energy and all of the qualities of something very large and very stupid being guided by something else. He found it, and he found the person who had let it in. Quirrell was in the sub-basement corridor with his back to Harry, doing something to the mechanism on the side passage door that Harry could feel even from 30 feet away, a loosening of the containment ward, specific and deliberate, the kind of thing you did if you wanted something large and stupid to be able to move through a passage it shouldn't be able to use. Harry stood in the dark of the corridor and watched. He was very still. He was very good at being very still. Quirrell didn't know he was there. Harry watched him work and thought about what he was watching. The tremor in the man's hands that wasn't nerves, was something structural, something underneath the surface of him that was exerting pressure. He'd felt that quality before. In the incident files. In the training room when the fiend had come through the wall. He thought about a cold night 2 years ago when the temperature in a room had dropped 10 degrees. He thought about Makima saying, "Something in the last month has shifted his timeline." He watched Quirrell finish the modification, straighten, dust off his hands, and walk away down the far passage without looking behind him. Harry stood in the dark for a moment. Then he walked back up to the castle, found the nearest castle wall sconce, and using the small piece of charmed parchment Makima had given him before he boarded the train, a one-way communication channel, words that burned after reading, untraceable, he wrote 4 words. "He's already here. Quirrell." He folded the parchment, set it on the sconce, and it burned in a brief gold flame that left no ash. He went back to Gryffindor Tower, sat at his desk, and thought. There was a troll loose in the castle tonight. He knew where it was going. The containment passage led to the 2nd floor, and from the 2nd floor the logical path for something that size following the noise of a feast was toward the ground floor. If there was anyone in the path, he moved. He was out of the common room before he'd consciously decided to leave it, moving through the castle with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew every route. He needed to find Hermione. She'd been upset at dinner, something Ron had said about her being insufferable, which had been cruel in the specific way of a person who hadn't meant to be cruel and was too embarrassed to correct it, and she wasn't at the feast. He found her in the 2nd floor bathroom 30 seconds before the troll found the corridor outside it. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. Hermione. Out. Now. She looked up from where she was sitting on the floor with her back against the sink. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying, which she would absolutely hate him knowing, and he could see the moment she registered that he wasn't here about the crying and filed that for later. "What, troll?" he said. "In the corridor. Moving this direction." She was on her feet immediately. She was always on her feet immediately when there was something that required being on her feet. They got to the door. The troll was in the corridor. It was large and it smelled like something very large that didn't wash, and it had a club that it was dragging along the stone floor, and it turned its tiny, stupid eyes toward them, and it had already decided it was going to move toward them when Harry raised one hand. Not dramatically. Not with a wand. His wand was in his jacket and he could have reached it, but the motion of reaching would have taken 3 seconds, and this was already a 3-second situation. He looked at the troll. He assessed its state, large, stupid, driven by proximity to noise and warmth, no internal navigation, its momentum and aggression the only directive properties it had. He found the state he needed to address and he withdrew the concept of it. The troll sat down. Not forcibly, it just ceased to have the property of being in motion. Its legs folded. Its club hit the floor with a sound like a small explosion. It sat in the corridor with the profound confused expression of something that had been going somewhere and had forgotten what going meant. Hermione stared at it. "What did you just do?" she said. "State intervention," Harry said. "It won't last long. Come on." They moved past it while it was still sitting down. Behind them, Harry heard it beginning to stir, the forward momentum concept reasserting itself once he was no longer actively maintaining the withdrawal. They were around the corner before it fully recovered. In the alcove at the end of the corridor, Hermione turned and looked at him with an expression that was processing several things at once. She was good at that, he'd found. She didn't need to process them sequentially. "You didn't use your wand," she said. "No. You sat down a 12-foot troll without a wand." "Yes. Using a magical methodology that isn't in any first-year curriculum. Or most advanced ones," he said. She looked at him. Red-eyed still, breathing hard from the sprint, her hair insane from the movement. "Harry," she said carefully. "Exactly who taught you?" He looked at her. He thought about 4 years in Southwark. About the book on his 7th birthday. About a roof in London and a rope going straight. About Kishibe's hand on the back of his neck and bad rice and a woman with golden eyes who had opened a cupboard door and looked at what was inside without flinching. "Someone who knew what they were doing," he said. Hermione nodded slowly. That was a non-answer and she knew it, and she also knew, he could see, that this wasn't the right moment to push it. She filed it under questions for later with the click of someone who had a very organized mental filing system. "The troll was let in deliberately," Harry said. She blinked. "What?" "I saw it happen. The sub-basement corridor. A specific ward was loosened to let it through." He looked at the corridor. "It was a distraction." "From what?" He looked at her. He thought about the third-floor corridor, the locked door, the compressed energy of something placed there recently. "I think," he said carefully, "I know what someone's trying to get to." She stared at him. And I need more information before I do anything about it." He straightened. "Are you all right?" She blinked at the abrupt subject change. Yes. I'm fine." "He was wrong," Harry said. "Ron." "What?" he said. "You're not insufferable. You're rigorous, which is different. He'll understand that eventually." She looked at him. Her expression did something complicated. "You came to find me," she said. "Before the troll was a problem." "I was mapping the lower corridors," he said. "And you came to find me." He looked at her. "Yes," he said simply. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you," with the same careful weight he used on the rare occasions he said it, and he understood that she meant everything he had meant by it in those rare occasions, which was, "This is real, and I know it is, and I don't know quite what to do with it yet." "Come on," he said. "The feast will be ending." They walked back to Gryffindor Tower through a castle that had gone properly quiet, the troll's passage already audible from 3 floors down as someone discovered it and started shouting, and the noise of the feast breaking up as the news spread, and Harry thought about third-floor corridors and defense against the dark arts teachers with tremors in their hands, and in Southwark a piece of burned parchment left no ash, and somewhere Makima read 4 words in gold flame and was already thinking 3 moves ahead. He met Dumbledore in November. Not because Dumbledore summoned him. Because Harry decided it was time. He walked to the headmaster's office after dinner on a Tuesday, spoke the password. He'd asked Percy Weasley, who knew it, by asking the entirely truthful question of whether passwords changed by term, which had required Percy to demonstrate the current one, and walked up the spiral staircase and knocked once. Come in, Dumbledore said, in the voice of someone who had been expecting this and had decided to make it appear that he'd been expecting something else entirely. Harry came in. The office was full of things, instruments that moved and clicked, portraits of previous headmasters that looked at him with varying degrees of interest, the sword of Gryffindor in its case, a bird he recognized as a phoenix from his reading on magical creatures, sitting on its perch and regarding him with calm amber eyes that he found he liked immediately. Dumbledore was behind his desk. He looked at Harry with the warm, patient attention and the eyes that were doing something more precise than the expression around them. "Harry," he said, and the warmth in his voice was real. It was constructed from something real, Harry thought, which made it more convincing than warmth that was entirely performed. He genuinely found Harry interesting. He just also found him useful, and the two things had been running alongside each other for so long that he possibly couldn't distinguish them anymore. "Please sit down." Harry sat. "I have been hoping to speak with you since the start of term," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said. "You've settled in well, by all accounts." "Yes." Dumbledore folded his hands. He looked at Harry with the specific quality of someone deciding how direct to be, calibrating. "I'd like to tell you some things about your past," he said. "About your parents." "About what happened the night." "I know about my parents," Harry said. "I know about Voldemort. I know about the prophecy." He held the old man's gaze. "I know about what you planned for me. What you were building when you put me in that cupboard." The office was quiet. Dumbledore was still for a moment. The warmth didn't leave his expression, but it reorganized around something more careful underneath it. "I see," he said, slowly. "You've been well informed." "Yes." "May I ask by whom?" "No," Harry said. Another pause. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, the eyes behind the half-moon glasses doing what they actually did when they weren't performing accessibility. "Measuring. Understanding. You're not what I anticipated," he said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said since Harry walked in, and Harry recognized it as such. "I know," Harry said. "That's not a criticism," Dumbledore said, carefully. "I know that too." Harry looked at the Phoenix, who was watching him with those amber eyes. "Professor Dumbledore. I know what's on the third floor." The quality of the silence changed. "I know it's the Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. "I know you moved it here from Gringotts in July because Gringotts had been broken into and you needed a more secure location. I know something in this castle is working toward accessing it. And I know that something connects to Voldemort." He looked back from the Phoenix to Dumbledore. "I'm not telling you this because I want you to handle it. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I'm aware of it." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. "You are," he said finally, "not what I anticipated." "You said that. I find I need to say it twice." He was quiet. The instruments clicked softly around them. "Harry. What you know, the knowledge you have, the capabilities you've apparently developed, these are remarkable. But I want to caution you against, Professor," Harry said, pleasantly. "I'm not here for caution. I'm here to establish that we both know what we know and that I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He stood. "Whatever is working toward the stone, I'll handle it. You don't need to construct a trap for me to walk into." Dumbledore looked up at him from behind his desk, and for the first time in the conversation, the gap between the expression and the eyes closed entirely. He was just looking at Harry, fully, without the performance layer, and what was in his face was something more complex than Harry had a single word for. "You remind me," Dumbledore said quietly, "of someone I knew a very long time ago." "I hope not entirely," Harry said. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "No," he said. "Not entirely." Harry walked to the door. "Harry," Dumbledore said. He stopped. "I did what I believed was right," Dumbledore said. "For the cupboard. For all of it. I want you to know I believe that." Harry stood with his hand on the door. He thought about this for a moment, not about whether to be angry, he'd moved past anger about it a long time ago, but about what the true response to it was. "I know," he said. "That's the most frightening thing about it." He opened the door and went back down the spiral staircase into the castle, and above him Dumbledore sat at his desk for a long time without moving, and the Phoenix watched the door through which a 10-year-old had just walked out, having made the headmaster of Hogwarts feel, for the first time in several decades, that he might have miscalculated something fundamental. Outside, the castle was enormous and alive and full of magic older than anyone in it, and Harry moved through it toward Gryffindor Tower, where Hermione would be at her desk and Neville would be practicing his wand work and the fire would be going, and he walked through the corridors of a school that had been built to shape him into something specific and which had already, in just 3 months, begun to understand that the shaping had been done elsewhere and had produced something it hadn't planned for. The third-floor corridor waited. So did Quirrell. So did everything that was coming. Harry went to bed, and in the morning there would be Transfiguration with McGonagall and lunch with Hermione and Neville and the ongoing project of understanding the castle and whatever was in it, and he was not afraid of any of it. He never had been. Chapter 6, The Devil Under the Turban. December came to Hogwarts the way it came to all cold places, completely, without negotiation, turning the grounds white and the lake iron gray and the castle into something that looked, from the outside, like an illustration from a book about what winter was supposed to feel like. Harry didn't notice the cold particularly. He'd trained in worse. What he noticed was Quirrell's hands. He'd been watching them since September, the tremor, the way they occasionally moved to the turban without the face registering that they'd done it, the specific quality of the shaking that wasn't nerves or illness but something structural, something underneath the surface pressing out. Over the weeks it had worsened. By December it was visible across a classroom, and the defense against the dark arts lessons had developed an ambient tension that nobody in the class could have named but everyone was responding to, the way animals respond to barometric pressure before a storm. Harry sat in the front row of Dada and watched Quirrell teach a lesson on counter-jinxes and thought about the energy signature he'd felt when he'd watched the man in the sub-basement corridor in October. He'd felt that quality twice before, once in the training room in Southwark when the feared devil arrived, and once in the incident file analysis he'd done with Kishibe when he was 8, the directional weakness in the energy pattern data. The signature wasn't Quirrell's. It lived in him but it wasn't his. Something was inside the man. Not a fiend, not exactly. The integration was different, the energy pattern more controlled, more deliberate. A fiend was a devil in a corpse, the personality of the original person eroded by the occupancy. What Harry was reading in Quirrell was a sharing, 2 presences in one body, the original personality still there but suppressed, pushed to the edges of the space it used to inhabit entirely. He thought about Makima's words from 2 years ago, something that was once human, that pushed the limits of what magic can do so far past any natural boundary that something in him fractured. Voldemort wasn't using Quirrell as a weapon. He was using him as a vehicle. After class, Harry stayed behind. The other students filtered out. Hermione gave him a look on her way past. She'd developed an accurate radar for when he was doing something deliberate and needed to not be accompanied, and she left without comment. Quirrell was at the front of the room, erasing the board with his back to Harry. "Professor Quirrell," Harry said. Quirrell turned. The tremor in his hands was constant now. His eyes had the quality of eyes that weren't entirely in charge of themselves, present, aware, but with something behind them that had its own agenda. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice had layers to it that Harry's ear had been trained to read. "I wanted to ask about the practical component of the counter-jinx module," Harry said. "You focused the course on theoretical identification. When do we move to application?" Quirrell blinked. He'd been expecting something else, clearly, the look of a man who'd prepared a response for a question that hadn't been asked. The practical sessions are scheduled for the new year," he said. "Good," Harry said. He held the man's gaze. Not with pressure, just with that level, patient attention. "I'm looking forward to it." He walked out. In the corridor, he leaned against the wall and thought. The thing inside Quirrell had looked out through Quirrell's eyes at Harry. He'd felt it, the shift in the quality of the attention, like two different people briefly looking through the same window. It had recognized him. Whatever was left of Voldemort inside that body, parasitic and compressed and waiting, it had looked at Harry Potter from behind Quirrell's face and it had recognized him. Harry hadn't flinched. He pushed off the wall and went to his next class. He wrote to Makima that evening. Not the charmed parchment, that was for emergencies and time-sensitive intelligence. He wrote on regular parchment with his usual precision. The occupant is confirmed. Not a fiend. Shared body, original personality suppressed but present. The occupant is aware of me. I've identified two likely access routes to the third floor from the sub-basement, the one I observed in October and a secondary passage behind the tapestry on the east wall of the fourth floor. The containment on the stone is substantial but not insurmountable for something that knows what it's doing. Timeline, I think spring. I don't know what the trigger is yet. He paused. I met with Dumbledore in November. He's not going to try to stop me from handling this. I think he's decided to see what I do. Another pause, longer. I think he might be right to. He looked at the last line for a moment, then left it in, sealed the letter, and sent it with Hedwig into the December dark. Her reply came 4 days later, which was fast for regular post, which meant she'd been paying attention to his previous update and had thoughts already prepared. Your assessment of the timeline is consistent with what we're reading from the Highland sensors. The energy activity has been increasing in a pattern that suggests a building rather than a stable occupancy. What you're describing as a shared body with a suppressed host is consistent with the theoretical literature on fractured magical consciousness. There's a chapter in the book I gave you for your 7th birthday, pages 212 through 219, that you may find directly relevant now. He had read those pages. He went back and read them again. On the question of Dumbledore, you're right. He's chosen to see what you do. That's his version of trust, and it's also his version of a test. Both things are true simultaneously, which is characteristic of him. A pause, visible in the shift of her handwriting rhythm. Come home for Christmas. We have things to discuss in person. He went home for Christmas. The Southwark house was the same canal smell, same bad coffee, same quality of quiet that wasn't emptiness but the specific inhabited quiet of a place that had people in it who were comfortable not filling every silence. Kishibe cooked something terrible and earnest on Christmas Eve and Harry ate it and said it tasted like the concept of goodwill and Kishibe said eat it and he ate it. He was taller. He'd grown 3 inches since September, which Kishibe noted by standing back and looking at him with the expression of someone encountering a previously understood quantity that had shifted without notification. You're taller, Kishibe said. School food, Harry said. Does it taste like a concept? It tastes like actual food, mostly. He looked around the kitchen with the particular quality of attention you give to things you've been away from and are checking to make sure they're still as you left them. His 3 rocks were on the windowsill. The files on the 2nd floor were in their familiar arrangement. Hedwig, installed in her corner of the kitchen, was regarding the space with the judgmental patience of a bird who found her accommodations acceptable but not impressive. Makima came down at 8, dressed and precise as always, and she looked at Harry with the same quality of attention Kishibe had given him, the assessment of change over time, and then she set 2 cups of tea on the table and sat down. Tell me everything, she said. Not the letters. The things you edited out of the letters. He looked at her. She looked back. He told her everything. It took 2 hours. He told her about the castle, the energy readings, the 6 high concentration locations and what he thought each of them was. He told her about McGonagall and the Wednesday evenings and what he'd learned that wasn't in any book. He told her about Snape, not the classroom theater, the thing underneath it, the quality of the man's attention in unguarded moments, the way he watched Harry with the specific expression of someone looking for something they're afraid of finding. He told her about Neville, who was performing below his actual level in every class because anxiety was a glass wall between him and his own capability, and about the small things Harry had been doing to remove the glass without Neville noticing he was doing it. He told her about Hermione, not as intelligence, as a fact of his life, the same way he'd tell Kishibe about anything that mattered. That she was the sharpest person he'd met in the castle and possibly the sharpest person he'd met outside of the safe house, and that she was driven by a need for competence that was partly genuine love of learning and partly the specific drive of someone who had grown up knowing they were different and had decided that being undeniably capable was the safest way to manage that. He'd watched that quality in himself for 4 years and recognized it in her without judgment. He told her about Quirrell. In detail. The hands, the signature, the moment in the classroom when the thing inside the man had looked out through his eyes. Makima listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished she was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet Kishibe refilled his coffee and Harry wrapped both hands around his tea and they waited. The pages I referenced, Makima said. 212 through 219. The fractured consciousness theory, Harry said. A magical practitioner who separates a portion of consciousness to achieve a form of continuity past physical death. The separation fragments the self, each fragment retains the original personality and magical capability but exists in a diminished state. He paused. The fragment inside Quirrell is diminished. That's why it needs Quirrell's body. Its own has been destroyed. And the stone, Makima said. Would restore it, Harry said. The elixir of life from the philosopher's stone doesn't just extend existing life. It can reconstruct a physical form around a fragmented consciousness. He thought about this. It's elegant, actually. In a terrible way. What does he know about you? Makima asked. That I'm here, Harry said. That I'm aware of him. That I'm, he paused, choosing precision. He knows I'm not what he expected. I felt that in the classroom. Whatever he anticipated Harry Potter to be, I'm not it. Good, she said. Is it? He might accelerate his timeline. He might, she said. Or he might wait. He's been waiting for a long time. He's patient in the way that things with no body and no clock become patient. She looked at Harry steadily. But you're right that we can't assume his timeline is fixed. She set her tea down. Tell me what you think needs to happen. Harry looked at his tea. He turned the question over in the careful, methodical way he turned everything over, feeling for its edges. The stone needs to be made inaccessible, he said. Not just secured, actually removed from the equation. As long as it exists in an accessible form, it's a target. He paused. But that's not mine to do. That's Dumbledore's. Or Flamel's. And the fragment in Quirrell? Makima said. That's mine, Harry said. Not with heat. Just with the same factual certainty he applied to everything else. He's in my school. He's using a person, a living person, as a vehicle. He's been trying to access something that will allow him to reconstitute and come back for everyone who survived the first time. He looked at her. That's not something I'm going to wait on. Kishibe was looking at the canal through the kitchen window. He had the expression of a man who had prepared himself for this conversation and found that preparation insufficient. You're 10, he said. Yes, Harry said. You're going to go back to school in January and confront a fragment of the most dangerous dark wizard of the century who is currently sharing a body with your defense against the dark arts teacher. Yes, Harry said. On purpose. Yes. Kishibe drank his coffee. Right, he said. The question, Harry said to Makima, is method. The fiend in the training room, I dissolved the integration. But that was a devil in a dead body. Quirrell is alive. I can't apply the same method. The dissolution would kill the host, Makima said. Yes. So I need a separation without dissolution. Release the fragment from the host without destroying either. He paused. The fragment is weakened. It needs the host's body for any physical interaction with the world. If I can separate the integration, break the connection without dissolving, the fragment loses physical form and the host is freed. Can you do that? Makima said. He thought about it with honest, clinical attention. I think so, he said. The state mechanics are more complex than the fiend case. But the principle is the same. I need to understand the integration point, where the fragment connects to the host's physical form, and withdraw the concept of the connection rather than the concept of either presence. You've never worked on a living person, Makima said. And you've never worked on a magical consciousness rather than a physical one. No, he said. That's two significant variables you haven't tested. Yes. And the fragment will be actively resisting. Yes. She looked at him steadily. What's your contingency if the separation fails? He met her gaze. Containment, he said. If I can't separate them cleanly, I contain the integration, hold it immobile long enough for quarrel to, he stopped. Long enough for the physical body to make the separation irrelevant. The kitchen was very quiet. You mean kill quarrel, Kishibe said. His voice was even. I mean create conditions in which Quarrel's body can no longer sustain the occupancy, Harry said, and his voice was even too, and both of them knew that the evenness was a choice, not an absence of weight. Kishibe looked at him for a long moment. Has it occurred to you, he said carefully, that there might be a third option? I've been looking for one since October, Harry said. I haven't found it yet. If you know of one, I'll take it. A pause. Kishibe did not know of one. He looked at Makima. Makima was looking at Harry. Come back here if anything changes, she said. If the timeline accelerates past what you can manage alone. If you need backup. I know, he said. And Harry. She held his gaze. Quarrel is being used. Whatever he is, whatever he agreed to, he's being used by something that doesn't regard him as anything but a tool. Keep that in mind. Harry looked at her. There was something in his expression that moved briefly, not grief, not exactly, but something that acknowledged weight without collapsing under it. I know what that looks like, he said. I'll remember. January back at Hogwarts was cold and direct, and Harry moved through the school with the particular clarity of someone who has spent a holiday thinking about something until it's resolved into a shape they can hold. He told Hermione. Not everything, not Makima, not Southwark, not the full picture. But the relevant operational information, Quirrell, the stone, the fragment, his plan. He told her in the library on the second evening back, speaking quietly with the specific quality of a conversation that was happening under the ambient noise of 50 people studying and would not be overheard. She listened without interrupting, which was not her usual mode. She had a structural preference for asking questions as they arose, and the fact that she didn't interrupt meant she understood the information was sequential and needed to be received as a whole before it could be questioned. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The fragment, she said. You're describing a Horcrux. He looked at her. It's a theoretical dark magic construct, she said. I read about it in, it doesn't matter where. The principle is exactly what you described. A portion of soul anchored outside the body to achieve a form of immortality. She paused. The anchoring requires an act of extreme violence. It splits the soul. She looked at him. If what's in Quirrell is a fragment of soul, your state separation mechanic should work, but the resistance will be enormous. A soul fragment doesn't want to be separated from what it's anchored to. It will fight that with everything it has. I know, Harry said. Do you know what else would separate it? She said. He waited. Your mother's protection, she said. It's still active in you. Whatever she did, the intention as state that you described, the protection as a property of your physical person, it would be anathema to a soul fragment. It's the exact opposite quality. It's creation rather than destruction. The soul fragment was made by an act of destruction. The property in your blood was made by an act of the opposite. Harry looked at her across the library table. Hermione, he said. Yes. How do you know this much about Horcruxes? She looked at him with the expression she used when she'd done something she knew was technically against the rules and had already decided the rules were wrong in this instance. I may have read some books in the restricted section, she said. The password system for the access ward is a phonetic cipher and Professor Flitwick uses the same cipher structure as the one on the second-floor charm display case which I decoded in September. He looked at her. You broke into the restricted section, he said. I accessed research materials that are unnecessarily gatekept, she said. In September. I wanted to understand the castle properly. He was quiet for a moment. I accessed the third-floor corridor in September, he said. She looked at him. I didn't go in, he said. I didn't remove any books, she said. They looked at each other across the table with the mutual recognition of two people who had been operating in the same register without knowing it, and something settled between them that had always been present but now had a name. The protection in my blood, Harry said, bringing it back. You're saying physical contact with the fragment would hurt it, Hermione said. Severely. Based on what the theory suggests. She paused. But the problem is proximity. To use that property you'd have to be close enough to touch, and at that range the fragment's resistance would be maximum, Harry said. Yes. He thought about this. State and property at the same time, he said. I separate the integration while the contact property acts on the fragment. Dual mechanism. Can you do both simultaneously? I've never tried, he said. I do layered state work in practice sessions. 2 states at once, McGonagall had me work on it in November. He thought about it honestly. It'll be harder than anything I've practiced. How much harder? I don't know, he said, which was the most unsettling thing he'd said in the conversation because he always knew the scale of what he was undertaking. Hermione looked at him steadily. I want to help, she said. You can't help with this specific part, he said. I know, she said. I mean before it. The theory. Let me help you map the integration mechanics before you attempt the separation. 2 people working the theory will find holes one person would miss. He looked at her. Yes, he said. Thank you. She opened her notebook. They worked for 6 weeks. Library sessions, common room evenings, a handful of McGonagall's office hours that started as transfiguration tutoring and evolved. Professor McGonagall had a quality of intelligent attention that made it difficult to be working on something genuinely interesting in her presence without her noticing and becoming involved, into something more like collaborative research. McGonagall never asked directly what they were working toward. But she provided books and answered questions, and on one occasion, when Harry asked about the theoretical mechanics of state separation on a dual-presence entity and watched her face go completely still for exactly 3 seconds, she had said, very quietly, I see, and then provided him with the most useful theoretical text he'd found on the subject. She knew. Harry was certain of it. She knew what was in the castle and she knew he was working toward it, and she was choosing to help him in the way that people with institutional obligations sometimes chose to help, indirectly, maintaining a deniable distance from the specifics, providing resources without claiming responsibility for what they were used for. He found that fair. Neville, who had been becoming steadily more capable through the term in a pattern he definitely didn't connect to Harry's specific choices in their shared classes and study sessions, asked him one evening in the common room, You're getting ready for something. Harry looked up from his notes. You have that look, Neville said. He was getting better at reading people, another thing that had been developing gradually, the anxiety thinning enough to let the intelligence under it show through. Like when you're about to do something in class that everyone else thinks is difficult and you don't. I'm always getting ready for something, Harry said. Something specific, Neville said. Harry looked at him. He thought about what Kishibe had said on the roof before Hogwarts. You're allowed to have pieces of normal. He thought about what normal looked like in this context, what it meant that a boy he'd chosen to be near because something in his first reading of him had suggested solidity, real solidity, the kind that came from having been through something genuinely hard, was now sitting across from him in a firelit common room asking perceptive questions. "Yes," Harry said. "Something specific." "Do you need help?" Neville said. Not with heroics in his voice. With the plain, direct quality of someone who was asking a real question and prepared for a real answer. Harry looked at him for a moment. "Not with the specific thing," he said. "But when it's over, there might be consequences. Institutional ones. People asking questions and wanting official narratives." He paused. "I'd rather have people around who know the actual version." Neville held his gaze. "I can do that," he said. "I know you can," Harry said. Neville nodded and went back to his herbology reading, which was the most important thing about him. He could have a significant conversation and then simply continue, without needing it to be longer than it was. Harry went back to his notes. Across the common room, Ron Weasley was playing chess with himself and losing deliberately on the right side so the left side had a more interesting game. He caught Harry's eye and raised an eyebrow in the general direction of Harry's notes. Harry shook his head slightly. Ron shrugged and went back to his chess. He was a better person than he knew he was, Harry thought. The thoughtlessness ran shallow, and underneath it was something fundamentally decent that was going to come through properly with time. Not tonight, though. Tonight was theory. The trigger came in June. Not spring, as Harry had predicted. June, the last week of term, with exams finishing and the castle going loose and warm in the way it did when the year was nearly over. Harry was in the library returning a stack of books when he felt the shift, not a sound, not a visible thing, but a change in the quality of the castle's ambient energy that he'd been monitoring since September, a pressure dropping suddenly, the way air pressure drops before a storm but faster and more total. Something had moved. He left the books on the return desk and walked, not ran, toward the third floor. Hermione found him in the corridor. She'd felt something too. She'd developed, over the year, a sensitivity to magical energy shifts that she hadn't had in September, partly through her own study and partly, Harry suspected, through proximity to someone who read those shifts like weather. "It's happening now," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm coming," she said. He looked at her. He thought about the things she'd found in the restricted section and the 6 weeks of theory work and the way she'd looked at the problem from angles he hadn't tried. He thought about Makima and what she'd said about Quirrell as a tool. He thought about what came after this, the questions, the narratives, Dumbledore's version of events, everything that would require witnesses who knew the actual version. "Stay on this side of the door," he said. "No matter what happens in there, stay on this side. If I need you I'll call." "How will I know? I'll call," he said. "You'll hear it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded with the decisive click of her mental filing system, the nod that meant "I have assessed this and I trust the assessment." He walked to the door at the end of the corridor. He put his hand on the lock. He opened it. The chamber beyond the door was large and dark, and the devil's trap they'd set, Dumbledore's architecture, Harry had to credit the construction, was elaborate and sequential, the kind of thing designed to slow a magical practitioner who was trying to move through it quickly. A large three-headed dog, unconscious and breathing in the first room. A trapdoor. Then, below, the sequential chambers that Harry moved through with a pace that was not rushed because rushing was how you made mistakes. Devil's Snare. He moved through it with a state withdrawal that cleared his passage in under 4 seconds. Flying Keys. He assessed the chamber, identified the target by damage pattern and flight irregularity, and had it in his hand in slightly under a minute. Hermione's theory work on the cipher had included, by some lateral logic, an analysis of the sorting algorithm the key's flight pattern was based on. He'd read her notes. The chess board. He stood at the edge of it and thought about what it was, not a puzzle, a performance. Dumbledore had designed this for someone who needed to demonstrate specific qualities, and the chess board required sacrifice as its central mechanic. He moved the pieces with his will rather than playing within the game's formal structure, which technically violated the rules of the chamber's design, and the pieces, responsive to magical intent rather than the formal rules of chess, let him through because the underlying enchantment responded to capacity, not compliance. He thought Dumbledore would have something to say about that. He walked through the potion chamber. He read the logic puzzle with genuine interest. It was well constructed, a real intellectual exercise, and he felt the pull of it, the pleasure of a good problem. He identified the answer in 4 minutes and walked through the fire. And then the last chamber. Quirrell was there. He was standing in front of the mirror of Eriste, and the tremor in his hands had reached his whole body, and he was trying to see something in the mirror that it wasn't showing him. Harry stood in the entrance to the chamber and took everything in, the mirror, Quirrell's posture, the stone that was not yet in Quirrell's hands, the quality of the energy in the room which was enormous and pressurized and coming from multiple directions at once. Quirrell heard him and turned. The face was the same face Harry had watched across a classroom for a year. But it was different now. The control that had been holding both presences in manageable cohabitation was slipping, the fragment under the surface pressing harder, and Quirrell's eyes had the specific quality of someone who was losing a long argument against something inside them. "Potter," Quirrell said. His voice had layers in it, stacked on top of each other, two voices occupying the same breath. "Professor Quirrell," Harry said. He walked into the chamber. "Stop," Quirrell said. His hand came up. A stream of conjured fire, wide and bright, crossed the distance between them. Harry walked through it. Not by extinguishing it, he let the state of the fire sit, moved through the space it occupied by withdrawing the concept of it being a barrier rather than a phenomenon, and came out the other side without a mark on him. It was the same principle as the devil's snare. Anything that existed as a concept rather than a fundamental physical property could be addressed this way. Quirrell stared at him. "What are you?" the second voice said, and it was clearly the fragment speaking, and the quality of it, the layers, the pressure, the ancient fury of something that had been reduced to this, was enormous. "Harry Potter," Harry said. He stopped 4 feet from Quirrell. He could feel the fragment clearly now, its full weight, without the classroom distance filtering it. It was immense for something diminished, a concentration of fractured will and magical power and the specific rage of a consciousness that had been surviving in pieces for a decade, waiting. It looked at him through Quirrell's eyes. Harry looked back. "You should not be here," the fragment said. "You should be ordinary. You should be ignorant. You should be, what you planned for me," Harry said. "I know. You know nothing. You are a child. I'm the child whose mother's protection is currently active in my bloodstream," Harry said, "and I'm standing 4 feet from you, and I've been working toward this specific encounter since October." He held the fractured gaze. "I know a great deal, actually." Quirrell lunged. Not with magic, with his body, the fragment driving the host past what the host would have chosen, using it the way Harry had watched it be used all year. Harry didn't step back. He stepped forward, into the lunge, and his hand connected with Quirrell's face and simultaneously he reached for the state separation he'd been building for 6 months. The pain was immediate and total and came from 2 directions at once, his own, the feedback of working against the fragment's resistance at direct contact range, and the fragment's, which he could feel through the connection as something vast and furious and suddenly, shockingly, afraid. He held it. The separation mechanic he'd designed wasn't clean, it was nothing like the knot on the roof, nothing like the fiend in the training room. This was 2 presences woven together at a level that had been building for months, and the fragment's resistance was exactly what Hermione had predicted, enormous, desperate, fighting with the totality of what remained to it. He felt his grip on the state beginning to slip. He thought about pages 212 through 219. He thought about what the fragment had said, "You should be ordinary." The anger in him, controlled, deliberate, present, crystallized. Not hot. Cold. The specific cold of something long decided. He pushed. Quirrell screamed, and the scream had 2 frequencies in it, and his hands where they'd grabbed Harry's arms were blistering, the protection property working at contact range, the exactly opposite quality of a mother's sacrificial intention meeting a consciousness built on destruction and finding them incompatible in the most fundamental way. The fragment tore. Not from the world, from Quirrell. The connection point between them, which Harry had been holding and working against for 60 seconds that felt like considerably longer, broke with a quality that he felt in his entire body, a snapping of something that had been under enormous tension, the sudden release of it, the room going briefly white in a way that had nothing to do with light. Quirrell dropped. The fragment rose. It came out of Quirrell as something that had no body, a shape made of pressure and intent and the fractured remnants of a consciousness that had been surviving on hatred and will for 10 years, and it was enormous without being large, the way a sound can fill a space that seems too small for it. It looked at Harry. Harry looked at it. "You're significantly reduced," Harry said. "Separated from your anchor. No physical form. The stone is still in the mirror, you didn't get it." He held its gaze without moving. "You can try me now if you want. Or you can retreat and wait, and I will find the rest of what you left behind, because I know what Horcruxes are and I know you made more than one." The fragment was silent in the way that formless things are silent, not quiet, radiating something, the pressure of a will that still existed even in this state. "This isn't over," it said. The voice had no body to shape it, came from everywhere and nowhere. "No," Harry said. "It isn't." He held the formless gaze. "But this part is." He withdrew the concept of the fragment's presence having physical reality in the room. It wasn't dissolution, that was for devils, for dead hosts, for entities that existed fundamentally as physical force. This was different. The fragment of soul had survived destruction once by its own design. He couldn't destroy it. What he could do was what he could do to any state, withdraw it. Not permanently, not completely, but enough. Return the fragment to the diminished, disembodied condition it had been in for a decade, stripped of the anchor and the physical presence, reduced to something that would need time and resources to reconstitute even fractionally. He felt the resistance even to this, the fragment fighting the withdrawal with everything it had, which was still considerable, and the effort of it dropped Harry to one knee with a quality of exhaustion he hadn't felt since the fiend 3 years ago. He held it. The fragment was gone. The chamber was empty and quiet. Quirrell was on the floor, breathing shallowly, alive. The protection property had burned at every point of contact but Harry had separated them before the sustained occupancy damage could complete. He was hurt. He was alive. Harry was on one knee and breathing hard and the mirror of Eriste was behind him showing him, he was fairly certain, whatever it showed people when they looked into it, and he didn't turn around. He had known, since he was 10 years old and Ollivander had said curious, very curious, and since he was 6 years old and a woman had opened a cupboard door, that there were things he wanted. He didn't need to see them reflected back at him by a mirror to know what they were. He pressed his hand to the cold floor. He breathed. "I need a healer in the 3rd floor chamber," he said, to the room, knowing the castle listened and that Dumbledore had this room monitored in a way that would carry that statement where it needed to go. "Quirrell is alive. He needs medical attention now." He stood up. He felt the mirror behind him like a warmth but he didn't look. He walked to the chamber door, opened it, and on the other side Hermione was there. She'd heard, she'd been listening through the door the entire time, her face completely bloodless but her spine straight, and she said, "Are you hurt?" He thought about his answer. "Yes," he said, honestly, because he was, the contact burn on his hands, the exhaustion of the sustained state work, something in his chest that had nothing to do with the physical and everything to do with having just felt the shape of something that had killed his parents from the inside for 60 seconds. Nothing critical. She put her hand on his arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They walked out of the chamber together, and behind them the mirror of Eriste stood in its empty room and showed its reflections to no one, and Quirrell breathed on the cold floor, and somewhere formless and furious and diminished, a fractured will fled the castle and went looking for somewhere to wait. Harry walked up through the Devil's Trap chambers without speaking and through the locked door at the top and into the third-floor corridor of Hogwarts, where the stone walls were warm with summer and the windows were bright with June, and he sat down with his back against the wall and looked at his hands. Hermione sat beside him. "You did it," she said. "Most of it," he said. The rest is later," he said. She nodded. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere in the castle a bell was ringing, the shift change of the castle's magical monitoring system, a sound Harry had catalogued in September. 3 more bells would follow it at 10-minute intervals. "Neville's going to want to know what happened," Hermione said. "I'll tell him," Harry said. "McGonagall too." "Yes. And Dumbledore will want to have another meeting." "Probably several," Harry said. She looked at him sideways. "Are you ready for that?" He looked at his hands. The burns from the contact, fading already, his mother's protection property working in both directions, it turned out, the act of using it healing the feedback damage it generated. He'd note that for his records. "I'm ready for everything that comes after this," he said. "That's what the last 5 years were for." She was quiet beside him. "Then, Harry." "Yes. When this is all sorted. The meetings and the questions and whatever Dumbledore decides to do about everything." She paused, choosing words with her usual precision. "I want you to teach me the state methodology. Properly. From the beginning." He looked at her. She looked back with that sharp, total attention, the attention that missed nothing. "Yes," he said. "I will." They sat in the corridor while Hogwarts moved around them, teachers and students and the accumulated weight of 600 years of magical education, a castle that had not seen anything quite like this year and would be working out what it meant for some time. Harry leaned his head back against the stone. Above him, in the headmaster's office, an old man with half-moon spectacles was already at his desk with his quill, and for the first time in a very long time, he did not know what to write.